Good morning. I'm Brian Soublé, Deputy Director and Chief Counsel for the Department of Motor Vehicles. I'd like to welcome you to this morning's session. Over the last few years, I and other representatives of the department have been asked to participate in panel discussions or to speak at numerous conferences and events to all types of audiences. Some of the feedback that we've received has come from questions and the comments that we received at those events. Last fall, I spoke to a class of students at a middle school here in Elk Grove. And a few days after I spoke, I received a stack of thank you cards that included personal messages from the students. One comment that really spoke to me and the regulations that we're working on came from a student named Emily. And on her thank you card, she wrote, quote, "I really like the idea of self-driving cars or autonomous vehicles. My mom says that I was born in the technology generation. It's rather weird. There are too many possibilities. Maybe it should be tested on all roads in all climates. Then maybe it can be trusted. It's only been 100 years since cars were made. Maybe they should try something small, like a lawnmower." We're probably past the point of starting with a lawnmower, but I'd like to welcome you to our workshop for the regulations being developed pursuant to California Vehicle Code Section 38750 for the deployment of autonomous vehicles on public streets in California. By now, most of you are pretty familiar with the subject matter of today's hearing, but I think a brief introduction is necessary for those who do not know the background of DMV's involvement in regulating autonomous motor vehicle technology. Senate Bill 1298 from 2012 enacted Vehicle Code Section 38750, which requires the DMV to adopt regulations setting vehicle equipment requirements, performance standards, safety certifications, and other matters that the department concludes are necessary to ensure the safe operation of autonomous vehicles on public roads, with or without the presence of a driver in the vehicle. DMV divided that task into two phases. The first, the testing regulations, were approved in May of 2014 and became effective in September of 2014. Our workshop today concerns the second phase, the deployment regulations. Vehicle Code Section 38750 specifies that an autonomous vehicle shall not be deployed on public roads until the department approves a manufacturer's application pursuant to the regulations adopted by the department, and requires that the application contain at a minimum certifications by the manufacturer that the vehicles have a mechanism to engage and disengage the technology that is easily accessible to the operator. There's a visual indicator inside the vehicle that indicates when the technology is engaged. There is a system to safely alert the operator when there is a failure of the technology, and the vehicle either allows the operator to take manual control through the use of the brake, the accelerator pedal, or the steering wheel, or if the operator cannot or does not take control, the vehicle must be capable of coming to a complete stop. The technology must meet federal motor vehicle safety standards for autonomous technology, and it must not make inoperative any motor vehicle safety standard. There must be a device to record autonomous technology sensor data prior to a collision. The technology has to be tested on public roads and under the testing standards specified in the department's testing regulations. And the manufacturer has in place $5 million of financial responsibility. In addition to those mandatory certifications, the statute in 4 distinct places stresses the safety mission by requiring that the regulations shall include testing, equipment, and performance standards, and, quote, additional requirements that the department concludes are necessary to ensure the safe operation of autonomous vehicles on public roads, end quote. This theme of safety was echoed in NHTSA's recent announcement, the update to the 2013 preliminary statement of policy concerning automated vehicles. Quote, Essential to the safe deployment of such vehicles is a rigorous testing regime that provides sufficient data to determine safety performance and help policymakers at all levels make informed decisions about deployment, end quote. As stated further in that update, the governing principle should be that technologies with proven data-supported benefits that would make the road safe should be encouraged. This has been the department's goal in drafting these regulations, to ensure that technologies that have been tested and have data-supported proof that they are safe for operation on public roads are allowed to operate in California. The regulations we are discussing today will establish the requirements that manufacturers must meet to obtain a permit from the department for the deployment of autonomous vehicles by the general public. Given the emerging nature of autonomous technology, DMV's development of the draft regulations we are discussing today raises complex questions on issues ranging from vehicle safety to certification approaches, operator responsibilities, licensing and registration requirements, privacy, and finally, cybersecurity. At the last public workshop, which was held almost exactly a year ago today on January 27, 2015, the DMV sought input from manufacturers, research and academic entities, consumer advocacy organizations, and other stakeholders. We were seeking specific input on the standards the department should use to evaluate the certifications that are required by Vehicle Code Section 38750. We opened that workshop with a general question on what standards a manufacturer uses when making the decision that a vehicle is safe for public deployment. We heard things like, manufacturers apply a variety of functional safety analyses and processes to certify to themselves how a vehicle functions once it is deployed, and that the manufacturers view this as proprietary. The standards certifying the safety are internal to each manufacturer. Manufacturers use a functional safety process to look at how a vehicle behaves, and they do structured testing to challenge the software and develop confidence in the vehicle's capabilities. There are specific driving scenarios being tested by OEMs, and we don't necessarily need a third party to verify safety. DMV should just make manufacturers demonstrate that the vehicle can operate in the scenarios intended by the manufacturer. DMV shouldn't mandate any particular functional safety standard. Manufacturers should self-certify in their applications that they've conducted a functional safety assessment. DMV is not in the best position to evaluate safety of any product. Operators and owners should be made aware of the limitations of a vehicle's capabilities. The regulations should be performance-based. DMV should make sure that the vehicles operate as represented by the manufacturers. DMV can't believe in self-certification. It must rely on third-party testing. And then the opposite of that. DMV should not rely on third-party testing because the engineer working on the systems know the systems better than anyone. We studied those comments and we took them into consideration in writing these draft regulations. You will see that some of the concepts have been included in the draft regulations, which goes to show the value of having sessions like this. Last week, we sent out an agenda for today's workshop, and we have additional copies of the agenda in the back of the room if you haven't already picked one up. The workshop is also being webcast and recorded and will later be available on our website. It is also being transcribed. So for the benefit of those viewing today or later, once we've posted the video to our website, and for our court reporter, when you wish to speak, please talk into the microphone and state your name so that we can get it all down on the record. We have 2 microphones here in the front of the room that should be used when you wish to make a comment. This is a working session on the draft regulations. As you can see from our outline, our objective today is to receive substantive input regarding the testing and certification of vehicle safety to facilitate the deployment of the post-testing regulations. We want to have a participatory discussion on certifications by manufacturers that autonomous vehicles can be operated safely on the public streets and by the general public, and how the DMV will be able to determine the validity of those certifications in order to approve a manufacturer's application for the post-testing deployment of autonomous vehicles. As this is a session to discuss the draft regulations, it's not a session for general prepared statements on autonomous vehicles and on the deployment of such vehicles. If you have a prepared statement, that you want to make, please just submit it to my staff, which is in the back of the room. We want to spend our time today discussing the proposals itself. We're not going to allow time for the delivery of general prepared statements. We greatly appreciate your participation in this session, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts and comments on the regulations. I should point out, this is a session on, the reason why it's called a workshop, because it is truly that. It's a workshop on the draft proposal that we've submitted. And with that in mind, it is not a substitute for participation in our formal rulemaking process, which would follow shortly after this session. We are ready to begin when we are ready to begin the formal rulemaking process, we'll of course publish a notice and open a 45-day comment period and actually have another formal hearing on that proposal. At that time, you would be able to provide both written and oral comments regarding the draft regulatory proposal. A few housekeeping items before we get started. If you parked your car in the lots around this building, they require a daily parking permit. So if you didn't get a daily parking permit, there are kiosks. There's usually a blue light above them. You should take care of that. I wouldn't want you to get a ticket for not having the parking permit. For those of you who are interested in Wi-Fi, yes, there is a Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi here in the room. The network name is SAC Link Secure. That's capital S-A-C, capital L-I-N-K, capital S-E-C-U-R-E. It's all one word. The login is alum-guest, and the password is capital A, capital C, G-U-E-S-T, 92013. No spaces in there. The restrooms are located outside of the room in the back. For scheduling purposes, we're going to take a 10-minute break at 11. We'll start promptly at 11:10. We'll break for lunch from 12 to 1, starting back promptly at 1 o'clock. And we'll take an afternoon break at 2:15, starting back promptly at 2:30. The first item on our agenda is introductions. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Brian Soublé. With me at the table is Bernard Soriano. He is one of our project sponsors. Out there in the audience somewhere is Stephanie Doherty, our co-project sponsor. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Again, I'll remind you, when you wish to speak, please come up to a microphone, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and we'll get all that on the record. We're going to pattern our discussion on the agenda that was on the outline, so we're going to jump right into that outline. Our first topic is licensed driver in the vehicle, and the requirements in the regulations that, at least at this stage, there has to be a driver in the vehicle capable of taking manual control. I'm going to open it up now to receive comments on that. Okay, let's not be shy, because okay, John, come on up.
I'm John Simpson. I am Privacy Project Director for Consumer Watchdog. And first of all, I wanted to just commend the DMV for putting safety first. I think you got it exactly right. And, you know, with the test vehicles, we've had to have a human capable of taking over. I think at this stage, it's essential that that continue. And I think the proof of that is, in fact, in the disengagement reports that we were required to be filed with the DMV. And I focused on the Google one because they've got so many cars out there, and frankly, theirs was the most descriptive and most revealing about what actually is going on. And the concern is that over the 15 months that people had to report, Google, I think, drove 224,000 miles, something like that, on autonomous mode. That's a fantastic record. But they had to disengage the robot technology 341 times. 272 times, the car essentially said, sorry, can't handle this, you take over, which I guess is what software should do as long as there's a person there to take over. 69 times, the driver was scared enough that he jumped in and said, I better save the day. And then I guess with some later simulations, they figured out that in 13 cases, if the driver had not acted, there would have been a crash. So, yes, down the road, somewhere in the future, maybe when all the vehicles on the road are autonomous vehicles, because they can talk to each other, vehicle-to-vehicle communication, maybe then you don't need a driver. But right now, as their own report shows, that's what this chart is, it's the kinds of failures there were. 23.5% were software problems, some more were hardware. One of the
John,
more
can you
interesting
pull
ones-
up and speak into the microphone?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
One of the more interesting ones to me was perception discrepancy, when the car perceived something that wasn't really the case. So, for instance, they had trouble apparently sometimes with overhanging tree branches was the example they gave. They thought that that was something that was stopping them, and it really wasn't. One of the biggest problems apparently, too, was reckless behavior by other people, like bicyclists and other cars. That's going to be a tremendous problem for a long time. We're going to have autonomous vehicles on the road and just conventional cars that are 15 years old. The average age of a car right now on the road is 11.6 years. So it'll be a long time before the fleet changes over completely. Get back to the point, you've gotten it exactly right. You put safety first. And we need to have the regulation, despite what Google said about being deeply disappointed, and despite what Gavin Newsom said about maybe some of this technology being tested in other states, read Texas, I guess. Your responsibility is safety for Californians, drivers, and other people, citizens. And you've got it exactly right, and I hope you stay with this really important provision. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Anyone else wish to be heard on that issue? The specific sections of the regulations, if you've got a copy of the draft regulations with you, are section 227.52A5, which is on page 4 of the draft, and specifically section 227.84, which would be located on page 21 of the draft regs. Okay. Good morning. Go ahead and state your name, and if you're with an organization, what organization you're with.
Absolutely. Good morning. My name is Teresa Fabuzzi. I'm the Executive Director of the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers. There are 28 independent living centers in California who serve over 100,000 people with a variety of disabilities annually. And we're here really to talk about the licensed, unlicensed factor here, not just because we're talking, when we talk about licensed versus unlicensed, we're also talking about the actual technology of the vehicle itself. So are we talking about a vehicle that's going to have a steering wheel and pedals for gas and brakes? Or are we talking about a vehicle that has a steering wheel and everything that we're all kind of familiar with? We look at the potential of a fully autonomous self-driving car as nothing short of revolutionary for the disability community. This is a critical moment for the Department of Motor Vehicles. You have the opportunity to delay innovation and deny access to people with disabilities, or to take on the concepts of universal design when you consider the fact that the development and innovation of a truly fully autonomous self-driving car is not going to happen in California unless you allow it not to have a driver. A self-driving car does not require a licensed driver. The whole point of innovating and creating this true disruption in transportation is what we're talking about today. And we're talking about people with disabilities and seniors all across California. And the age wave of those of us who are graying, and I see a lot of gray tops here, we need California to keep up with the innovation in Silicon Valley. We need transportation to evolve. And we're not talking about putting unsafe cars on the road. We're not saying, hey, let's dumb it down for people with disabilities, because we hear that a lot. We hear, well, we'll get that figured out later. Let us just get all this stuff done, and then we'll make it accessible later. Well, we're 25 years past the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we spent a lot of time going backwards, trying to fix buildings that were created with stairs instead of ramps, trying to fix an entire information highway that wasn't accessible, trying to fix entertainment systems that don't include us. We're saying this is your opportunity to include all of Californians and to consider universal design and safety, and hold manufacturers to safety requirements, but don't keep us out, and don't keep us out of the revolution of innovation that really has the potential to put a whole lot of people on the roads that need access to employment, need access to health care, and have to be dependent on people and systems that just don't cut it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we hear your concerns, and that's the point of the development of these regulations. But again, as I mentioned, one of our primary missions that's been dictated to us by the statute is making sure that any deployment of the vehicles is safe for everybody, including the disabled person in the vehicle. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Justin Harford from Grass Valley. A couple points. First, the general stuff. I have to disagree with the first gentleman who spoke. First thing I would say is that I don't agree. I think that I don't agree that 5,000 pedestrians killed by drivers every year is safe. I don't think that means we're safe right now. I don't think that enough injuries in car accidents to fill a Vietnam War is a sign of that Californians are safe. The second thing that I would point out too is, yes, I'd expect that in a testing process, there's going to be a lot of errors, and that is why Google, I would imagine why they would have done all that testing before releasing it to the public. The second thing the thing that also comes to mind too is you actually stated in your introduction that it's already a requirement that the car have a reaction if the driver does not or cannot take control when the control is offered. That is, that the car has to stop if the driver doesn't take control of it. And now on the personal point, I would ask you to think about what it is exactly that people like Emily like about self-driving cars. They like the idea that you can read while you're in the car. They like the idea that you can text. And people, frankly, we're already at a point now, probably why 5,000 people are killed by cars every year, why that people don't want to drive their cars anymore. They want to use their phones. They want to read their books. And the question I have to ask is it really realistic to consider that a driver, licensed or not, in the car is really going to be taking control in an emergency situation when they're coming into the idea of an autonomous vehicle with the sense that they're going to be able to not pay attention? Now, for me, I would say that on a personal level, this has a lot of relevance. I find as a person who can't drive that I'm routinely segregated from the world of employment, of entertainment, of consumerism. I don't agree that safety from opportunity is a good idea. I think that we should be able to not be segregated from society. If you go onto a Craigslist ad, you can see in any job listing in Craigslist, they require a driver's license. Sometimes they go even further and require a vehicle. I remember I saw a really funny job ad in Boston, probably some of the best public transportation in the world. You were organizing with fast food workers, and they required that you have a license and a car in order to meet fast food workers at places where they work and at places of public transportation. So in other words, it wasn't good enough to get there on the public transportation when it was there. So for me, I find that this is really what this is really about, is who gets to access transportation and commerce and who doesn't. And I'm kind of, frankly, a little tired of people with disabilities not being able to access commerce.
Do you have some specific language that you would propose to go into the draft regulations?
Well, I think that, I guess, I mean, I'm not a policy expert. I was listening to your, some of the feedback you got. Some people said that third parties should do the testing. Some people said manufacturers should do the testing. I do kind of wonder about self-certification, how that works. I guess the question that came to mind for me, and I don't know if it's helpful, but who is responsible for testing vehicles for their crash safety equipment? We usually, you know, they have, as I understand it, tests where the automatic equipment in a vehicle like airbags has to be tested. There has to be sort of a process by which we figure out how safe a human would be in a car in the case of an accident. So is that a third-party tester? Is that the DMV? Is that self-certification?
No, that's why the statute specifically requires that the vehicle meet all of the federal motor vehicle safety standards and not make inoperative any federally required motor vehicle safety standards or any others. So, you know, even at that stage, the manufacturer already has to, before they can put a car on the street, it has to meet federal motor vehicle safety standards. So those things about crash safety and things like that, that really isn't the subject of our regulations because that's already covered in the federal regulations for vehicle safety.
So it sounds like then you might have a similar entity overlook regulations, of kind of do the review process for autonomous vehicles. And as far as the specifics of what they should look for, I would say that I think that you need to leave it up to the experts and the people who understand that technology. But what I can tell you is that by restricting people with disabilities from accessing this technology, you're not going to have a situation where things are safer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Kurt Augustine, and I'm with the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, which represents 12 of the world's largest manufacturers, which produce about 80% of the cars sold in the United States. And while we welcome the opportunity to have the chance to have many remarks, we'll be submitting prepared remarks, and I'll limit my particular comments in this segment to the aspect of the solo driver, and then we'll also be offering other comments. We believe with the current proposal of limiting to no trained, only having trained operators on board is overly broad and does not really consider automatic features development right now. This requirement as written conflicts with industry best practices and the definitions for various levels of automation as developed by the Society of Automotive Engineers. This proposed requirement removes one of the greatest benefits of technology, and that is that users would not need to monitor the technology at higher levels of automation. Now let's not mistake our comments with the fact that the 12-member companies of our association have the motoring public's safety as a paramount concern. So we do believe that the technology does allow some ability for having vehicles operated without trained operators. We believe the current draft requirement is likely to stifle some of the best ways to provide the mobility benefits for consumers and transportation planners, some of which you've heard already today. Related to that concern, the draft seems to hinder some current and near-term technologies that provide important steps to autonomy for both automakers and operators. For example, it's unclear if remote parking or automatic valet features are prohibited due to the requirement that an operator must be present in the vehicle and be ready to take over at all times.
I'll have to cut you off on that one. because if you look at the definition, and you mentioned the definitions of autonomous technology by the Society of Automotive Engineers, we know that NHTSA has its own levels of autonomy. Our statute does not speak to specific levels of autonomy. It defines what is an autonomous vehicle and what is not an autonomous vehicle. And it also says features like the parking features that you're talking about are not autonomous vehicles. And so to the extent that you're saying, well, there's some confusion, it really isn't, because the statute is pretty clear. And so what we're talking about is what the statute defines as an autonomous vehicle, not necessarily what SAE or the NHTSA levels define as an autonomous vehicle.
Well, that's why we comment that we do think it's unclear, and as someone who was personally involved in the development of the original statute, in addition to room full of lawyers that we have all over the world, there is some issues that we believe aren't quite clear.
Right,
we
so
need to
you were
work
there when they
there.
put those 4 requirements that we ensure that the vehicles be safe for
So
operation.
We're in the same ballpark. We just believe that there does need to be some clarity on that.
Sure.
So that's why we raise that. We're right. We don't actually say that it does, but it is just, it's not clear, and we'd like to work with you to provide that clarity.
Do you have some suggestions for that?
We will be submitting those to you, yes.
Thank you.
That's, for this aspect, I mean, that's really the issue. I'll be back up. You have the thrill of hearing me again. But we are, again, we would like to work with you on that, our little kerfuffle over what is clear and what isn't. So thank you, okay?
Thank you. Next.
Good morning. I'm Jacqueline Cerna with the Consumer Attorneys of California, and we did submit extensive comments and appreciate you looking at those comments. Really quickly on this issue, and I will have follow-up on other topics, but we were one of the parties that was also in the room with the first 1298 by Padilla, and so we do remember the drafting of the terminology, and we felt that, at least with respect to the definition for operator, there was a little bit of inconsistency with the statute and the vehicle code. We're not opposed to having someone at the steering wheel like others have discussed. However, we are concerned more with them being responsible for traffic infractions and things like that, and I'm sure we'll come back to that subject, but I just wanted to mention that early on. We feel like that will disincentivize the manufacturers from making these vehicles as safe as they can be if the consumer is going to be liable for any sort of mistakes that go wrong. Aside from that, like I said, the terminology in the vehicle code section and the regulations isn't entirely consistent, and so that was something we wanted to bring to your attention.
Could you explain how that's so?
Right, so if you look at the regulations, the definition for operator, and you compare that to vehicle code section 387504, that one reads, an operator of an autonomous vehicle is the person who is seated in the driver's seat, or if there is no person in the driver's seat, causes the autonomous technology to engage. Here we're saying that the operator is the person that is sitting in the seat. It doesn't have that option.
Right, but you also have to look deeper into the statute where it says that the department can, by regulation,
Right.
include things that they feel is necessary for safety.
Right.
And at this point, we feel that that definition covers that requirement that's in the statute, that we can include additional things that we believe are necessary for safety purposes.
Right. Well, it might be worth clarifying the vehicle code definition later on down the line as you proceed, because we do feel that they're inconsistent and they cause confusion in terms of defining operator.
And so what is your
purposes.
suggestion for the language?
Well, it's more defined in the comment that I provide, but I could
Right,
discuss
'cause
that if you'd
what's
like.
really going to work for us today, and it's as I mentioned earlier, this is a working workshop session on the draft text of the regulations that we put out. And so the reason why we put them out early, over a month ago, is so that when people come in to make comments today, they actually make comments and suggestions on what we have proposed. That way, when we get to the point of actually coming up with what we will call the formal rulemaking package, we would have included or even contemplated those types of suggestions when we
Okay.
go to make that draft.
Very fair. Then my other comment would be that it seems that there are 3 real periods that we're discussing here. We had the initial period that's already been in effect for over a year now. And this is more of a 3-year deployment period. At least that's my understanding from reading the regulations, before we actually get to full public deployment. And perhaps if you're going to use this definition for operator, it should be clear that it's just for those 3 years of provisional deployment, because it seems like there's still testing and gathering of data during that time. So perhaps it would make sense to link it to this particular point where we are dealing with a 3-year provisional period.
Good suggestion, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Next.
Hi, my name is Jessie Lorenz. I'm the Executive Director of the Independent Living Resource Center in San Francisco. This morning, I want to tell you a little story. I took my 4-year-old daughter to preschool taking BART. I sat down next to this woman, and she says to me, "You're so brave. I would hate to have your life." And in spite of myself, I couldn't help but smile, because unfortunately, even in 2016, we still have misconceptions and stereotypes about the lives of people with disabilities that paints our lives as tragic and dependent and in need of care. And I'm here today because I am one of the very lucky people in this world who was not only born blind, but has had the opportunity to drive an autonomous self-driving car down at Google. And it was amazing, and it was awesome. And I am an executive director at a nonprofit in San Francisco, and I pay a lot of taxes. And I own my home in Oakland, and I am a single mother. And I didn't plan for that to be my life. I didn't plan to be taking care of this little girl by myself. But as you look at developing regulations and you try to look at ensuring that everything is safe, please don't leave my family out in the waiting room. Please look at my family as a family that also might like to take a spontaneous road trip. Or when my daughter goes to kindergarten in September, perhaps I'd like to be able to drive her there instead of take public transportation. I understand that the internal mechanisms and the mapping mechanisms and all of the safety things are a concern, but we would like to work with you in this process because this has the ability to change lives and change families. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other commenters?
I will be brief, and thank you for all of the brave folks who have been up here today. So it's going to encourage my comments to be even more brief. My name is Andrea DeVoe. I am the Executive Director of TechNet, who represents the nation's leading technology companies in the space of innovation and technology. Thank you for being here today. You have a challenge in front of you. Brian, you eloquently said if you have solutions, bring them to the table. We will be doing so in a formal letter signed with a contingency of folks either this afternoon or early next week. So thank you for your review of those. A few comments briefly. I think in summary, a contingency of concerns with the entirety of the regulations related to the unmanned vehicle. The current regulations, if not amended, will actually make the roadways less safe. The statistics around vehicle safety are clear. Driver error is the #1 factor in car accident-related injuries and leads to more than 94% of vehicle crashes per year, according to the data collected by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Truly autonomous vehicles can reduce moving violations, drunk driving, and pedal error, and other dangerous behaviors. California should be a leader in the automotive space and not an obstacle. Clearly and indisputably, as stated eloquently here this morning, it will mean that people with disabilities and elderly citizens in California will not have the new mobility options opened up to them because they cannot contain a driver's license. We do look forward to working with you. We'll be here today, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Thank you. I'm Chris Urmson with Google.
Chris, why don't you talk more into the microphone?
Okay, I'll talk more into the microphone. That better? Sorry. So Chris Urmson from Google. So first, thank you. Really appreciate the effort put into pulling this together and the hard work that the department has been putting into regulations over the last many years at this point. So as you know, Google's self-driving program has been testing in the state for over 6 years.
Yeah, Chris, why don't you just go ahead and pick
Yeah, go
it
ahead and
up?
pick the microphone up. They can't
Sorry.
hear you in the back.
I'm sorry. Microphone fail. Is that better?
Yeah.
So as you know, we've been testing here in the state for over 6 years. We've driven over 1.3 million miles in autonomous mode and currently have 45 cars testing in and around Mountain View, California. We're focused on developing a fully autonomous car, what NHTSA calls level 4. I think in your language it would be an autonomous vehicle that requires no monitoring by a human. It will do the whole of the driving task. And on the basis of the DMV's proposed regulation we're discussing here today, it will not be available in California. In your statement, when you released the draft regulations we are discussing today, the DMV said, given the potential risks associated with the deployment, manufacturers need to obtain more experience of testing on public roads prior to making it available to the general public. And it may surprise you to hear, we couldn't agree more. Right? We really do believe that safety is the first priority here. And we need to get more experience on testing on public roads before we're ready to make this broadly available to the general public. This is why we have one of the most comprehensive test programs in the world for this technology. We drive 10 to 15,000 miles per week, which is the amount kind of a typical American drives in a year. We drive over 3 million miles in our simulator every day in testing. The testing will bring us to a point where one day our self-driving cars will be ready. And there was a nice graphic here with statistics about our test program, I think because they're fairly illustrative of the technology. One of the kind of key takeaways from that data that the gentleman talked about was the 13 kind of simulated contacts that we had. And I think it's important because of the framing of this conversation to put that in context. Of those 13 events, 8 of them happened in 3 months that we had to report during 2014. 5 of them happened over the whole of 2015, the 11 months that we had to report through there. And so that's 8 in 50,000 miles versus 5 across 370,000 miles of testing. And so you can see the rate of improvement in performance of this technology is tremendous. Of those 5, 1 of them we would have bumped into a traffic cone. You know, and that is the transparency with which we're trying to report this to you. So I think those who hide behind statistics in that way are maybe missing the point and missing the opportunity of this technology for California. So we recognize we have a lot of work to do. But we also believe that the DMV needs to act today to enable this technology to be brought into the marketplace for people to use. Because as we know, the regulatory process takes time and will eventually meet up. So some concrete recommendations. Firstly, you have to maintain safety as your prime concern. It is our concern as well. I think all the manufacturers in the room would agree with that. As we've stated many times in the past, we will enable members of the public to use our cars without a driver only once we are confident that they are safe. We're happy to show the work with the DMV, as we have been doing, and to ensure the methods that the regulators or manufacturers to show that the cars are safe and robust. More than happy to do that. Secondly, though, I cannot deliver this point more strongly. We need to be careful about the assumption that having a person behind the wheel will make the safety of the technology more safe. We have seen this internally with our tests. It's a generally understood problem with people monitoring for long durations of fairly robust technology. They do it poorly. Failures result from that. The draft operating regulation anticipates this happening, so kudos to you for that. It refers to vehicles being able to come to a safe stop if the operator does not or is unable to take control of the vehicle. At that point, it is very hard for us to understand why, in an operational regime with technology that's been demonstrated to be safe, that there's really fundamentally any difference between having an operator that we do not trust to be in the seat and not having one there at all. So thank you very much. We will be working with you and submitting a more detailed content of the language you didn't really understand the framing you were going to put around this meeting today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Next comment?
Urmson.
Next comment, please. If there's no one, go ahead.
Peter Clark with SFBRC, a public infrastructure consortium. You guys are doing a good job. Transit, trains, has gone through the process of, over a long period of time, of coming up with safety certification protocols. One of the things that for public transit, for a train control system, is a redundancy, and that's something that's not been considered in what you guys have been talking about. I would like to see a industry consortium of people within the industry getting together and coming up with a protocol for having more than one control system, having a backup, companies getting together, and when one actually potentially three, where if one, if there's an unsafe situation that comes up, there would be a master control, and if the other two think that there's an unsafe situation, the ability to potentially have them take over in that kind of situation. I think the point being is that this is a life-critical situation, and in life-critical situations, well, I was traveling back from Washington, D.C. with somebody from PATH, the Partners for Alternative Transportation and Highways, said that you could have the software for a word processing program may have 1 million hours of people working with it before you get all of the bugs pulled out of it. And with autonomous vehicles, you've got something that is much more complicated and is life critical. So for that, redundancy is a very good thing.
Thank you. I'm sure that if you had a conversation with Chris Simpson, you would hear how they are designing vehicles with the concept of redundant systems. And I'm sure that if you spoke with any of the manufacturers in the room, they'd probably also point out that there is redundancy in what they're trying to do. Because remember, you're relying on the technology to operate the control functions of a vehicle. So thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Jamie Karen. I'm a youth, and I'm a part of Community Resources, which is an independent living center in Hayward. And I work with a lot of, I belong to a disabled youth group, and I'm also part of a really cool organization called Yo Disabled and Proud. And last night at our youth group in Hayward, we all had a meeting, and each of the youth wrote like statements, and they're in this letter. So I'm gonna read the letter. It's like a page. So
What I would like you to do, because, for time's sake, we have a lot of material to cover today, why don't you submit the letter to our staff in the back, and we'll make sure that we take a look at it.
sure.
Thank you. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Monica Bowen with the California New Car Dealers Association. I'm going to focus my discussion on a less sexy part, the training plan in Section 227.84. I'd first like to state that as retailers, we do stand in opposition to the requirement that a vehicle have an operator. We would like our customers in California to have access to the best available products, and we believe that in the future and likely before DMV makes changes to regulations, those may include vehicles that do not require an operator. I thought somewhat ironically today, the situation with the parking highlights some of the value of having non-operated vehicles. Now, with that said, moving to Section 227.4, we think that there's a lot of uncertainty about what's intended with the certification requirement. First, it's unclear from the regulations whether or not the certificate could move between models or even makes of vehicles, and we've got some suggestions for clarifying that once we understand your intent with that regulation. In addition, it's unclear whether or not the manufacturer could subcontract that training, and we'd also recommend that that would be something that's available and that operate through the currently vastly regulated driver safety school system here in California.
Thank you.
I see that. Now you know why the driver's license is not in my possession. Oh well. I'm Sheila Gunn Cushman, and I am also a member of the Disability Action Network of Hayward at Community Resources for Independent Living. I'm also a member of several other disability consumer organizations, but I don't know which of them would say what, so I won't name them exactly. But I would like to be put on record as being in opposition of must have a driver's license in order to be in a self-driving car. I think that's kind of counterintuitive. Unless, of course, the Department of Motor Vehicles is willing to rewrite its regulations to allow a blind person a driver's license. If you are, I am interested, and you can...
I think that's more statutory than us changing a regulation.
I don't know. I didn't know the scope of this hearing, we came from the Bay Area, and one thing that I would like to see discussed in the future and would like to be a part of the discussions of is, this woman just mentioned parking. I want to be in a self-driving car. Basically, if anyone's read The Number of the Beast by Robert A. Heinlein, I want Gay Deceiver. I want that car. I want to be able to talk to the car, tell it where I want to go, and have an interaction with it as to what traffic conditions are and whether I want to take another route or what. And this could be through a smartphone or whatever. I want to talk about the extent of the technology and the interfaces with different. Okay, what just happened?
Nothing, you're okay.
I think this might be dying. I want to be able to interact with the car and have a broader application, but I also would like things talked about like if the cars are used for Uber or Lyft, then it's very important for me right now when I use Uber and Lyft to deal with the human in the car so the human knows how to find me. I want to know how the car is going to be able to find me. I want to be able to perhaps not own the car because I don't have the kind of money to own a car like Jesse does, or might, I don't know. But I would like to be able to rent a car for the day, like to come to Sacramento and talk to you folks, and like to ask for a self-driving car to drive me to the Oakland Coliseum train station from where I live, because that would have been a 15-minute drive as opposed to a 45-minute ordeal, which it was this morning. And I looked at paratransit, and they wanted to get me there an hour and a half early and have me freeze my tush at the Coliseum train station. I'm like, gee, we need these as soon as possible. So I would echo what other people have said, that say we want to be a part of the discussion. We want to be an ongoing part of the discussion. I want to test these things. But the other side is, yeah, I'm a little scared. I use machines all the time, and they crash, and they do odd things. But the way to make sure that they don't is to have a multiply redundant system. And the way to do that is that there could be some programmer commands that I can set up through my phone or something, where if the car is starting to have a problem, then first I'll tell it to turn on the camera so that someone will be able to look at the film later and find out what went on. And that's also for safety. If somebody all of a sudden gets in my car, I can say some key phrase and the camera can go on and the mic can start recording, and everything is there for documentation later. But it would also help if I could just give a command and the car could pull over, and that's fine.
I understand your concern.
You already cut off my friend, which I'm not very happy with. What she had to say was important because the youth are the future, and if you're not interested in hearing us, then I think you're already stating very clearly what you think.
No, what we want is some suggestions on the language that we have in the regulations, and that's what this is. This is a workshop, and I've said it a couple of times. This is a workshop on the draft regulations that we've proposed. And so we hear the concern about, the vehicles being able to operate without someone inside of it. But what we're working on is the language that we've proposed. So if you have some proposed language that you'd like to submit to us, we would be more than happy to consider that.
I don't know it, but I know that there are a lot of people who are interested in it. But what I would like is a more open dialogue, and I would like a dialogue where we don't have to be policy wonks to be able to have this discussion, because I don't think most of us are policy wonks.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to provide comment today. I did have some prepared remarks, but I've broken them down a little bit. So my name is Paul Scullion, Safety Manager with the Association of Global Automakers. We're a trade association representing a number of international automobile manufacturers, suppliers, and other trade associations. Our members' market share represents about 47% of U.S. sales and roughly 60% of sales within California. This is an important issue for global automakers, and our members continue to make substantial investments in this area. We recognize that this is a challenging issue. However, it's important that the regulatory framework for the operation of automated vehicles take a balanced approach on some of the key issues that policymakers seek to address. We have some significant concerns regarding many of the draft regulations, some of which I will address at a high level today, but we look forward to engaging with you throughout the future process. In general, we believe advanced vehicle technologies such as automated vehicles have the potential to provide tremendous benefits in terms of motor vehicle safety, emissions, and overall driving experience. However, the development of public policy ahead of the current state of technology can present a significant challenge for manufacturers, suppliers, as well as other technology providers. We believe it is important that any regulatory frameworks are developed incrementally and be responsive to actual changes in technology as automated vehicles enter the market. So while we're still in the process of developing detailed comments on each of the specific proposals, we have identified a number of key concerns, and I'll just sort of keep the remarks limited to the current topic. But I think we've heard some of them already today. I think on the issue of operator responsibility, we believe that the DMV has not adequately addressed issues related to the roles and responsibilities of the driver within the context of the proposed regulation. So based on the draft, the role of the person activating or deactivating the automated vehicle technology while sitting in the driver's seat of the vehicle will continuously change between driver and operator depending on whether or not the technology is activated or not. So we asked the DMV whether it's necessary to make this distinction, particularly where there's overlap between things like having licensing, a licensed driver, and being seated in the driver's seat. So we'd be open to sort of having further dialogue with you on that issue. In addition, we agree it's important that consumers understand the benefits and limitations of automated vehicle technology, and more importantly, how to use it. However, while it is important that the operator continue to monitor the safe operation of the vehicle at all times and be capable of resuming control in the event of a technology disengagement, driver licensing should not be contingent on manufacturer-provided training. And while manufacturers may provide training with instruction on using the automated technologies, driver licensing and skills assessment seems to be a more appropriate role for the DMV. We believe the department should reconsider its proposal. However, we'll be open to sort of discussing what process might work.
Yeah, you mentioned some unclarity about the roles and responsibilities of the driver or operator. Do you have some suggested language for that?
Well, I think we don't have any specific language at this point in time, but I think as some of the previous commenters have made, there does seem to be a bit of overlap between the definition for driver and the definition of overlap, so or the definition of operator. So I think sort of understanding how those could be more distinct, because I think that where the definition of driver may appear in other parts of statute, does the fact that they become an operator change their role and responsibility?
Right, and we hear that. We've been struggling with this statute, for almost coming up on 3 years now, and the issue becomes we are tasked with drafting the regulation, and so we draft it from a perspective of sitting down and taking a look at it. Mm-hmm. And the whole goal and purpose of this section is to get input. We've put some language out, and as we hear people say, well, the language doesn't work, what really will help us in coming up with the proposal that comes into a draft, that this is the regulation we want to do, is if we hear some comments about, okay, you point out what's wrong with it, what's the suggestion for making it right? And so, I'm putting that out to everyone, the way this session is going to work today, and that I get something that I can use in the future when we sit down and try and come up with the final rulemaking is, what suggestions did we get for making it work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we recognize that, and I think, we are in the early stages of review, but I think it's also important that we sort of hear what the shared concerns of the community are as well, so we can sort of take that into account when we're making suggestions as well. So definitely appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I see it's 11 o'clock, so as I mentioned in my introductory comments, we're going to take our first break of the day. It's 10 minutes. We will start back promptly at 11:10. Thank you. One of the issues is that if you don't speak directly into the microphone, you can't be heard in the back of the room. And so we really want to stress, unless you've got a powerful, booming voice, please hold that microphone close so that everyone in the room can hear your comments. And with that, we're going to go ahead with this gentleman.
Fine. Good morning. My name is Steve Mahan. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Santa Clara Valley Blind Center in San Jose.
I may have seen you in a video.
Well, yes, I was the subject of a video driving one of the Google self-driving cars back in 2012. I am blind, and as the director of a blind center, I represent hundreds of mostly mature and senior blind individuals from Santa Clara County, all of whom are incredibly interested in the return of the privilege of being able to drive again. Most of our clients are. It's a key problem for all blind individuals, as we've heard from some others earlier, and we actively engage in discouraging our clients who are losing their vision from being on the road, and ask them to follow the example of yielding up their licenses and turning to other transportation options for public safety. However, when I was a cited licensed driver for the better part of 40 years, there is no way that I would have chosen the options that are now the only options that are available to me as a blind person. So my comments today have to do with the requirement that there be a licensed monitor, if you will, or potential operator in the vehicle, in an autonomous vehicle. And I'm viewing it from the standpoint of fairness and also from the standpoint of logic. We know, for example, that 50,000 individuals are going to die on U.S. roads this year, and they're going to be involved in accidents that involve licensed drivers. We know that that will be the case, and one of the great arguments for autonomous vehicles is to reduce that carnage. But from a logic standpoint, we have had no serious accidents that have involved autonomous vehicles, and no fatalities, no serious injuries, and so on. And yet we're wanting to put a licensed monitor in those vehicles. It would seem to me that the vehicles that need an additional licensed monitor would be those that are operated by cited licensed drivers, since they are those are the cars that are involved in the accidents that we see. I would dare say that probably nobody on the committee and nobody in this room would, who is a licensed driver, would like to have to arrange for tomorrow for there to be somebody, to accompany you on your next drive, whether it be to 7-Eleven or whether it be to your office, or perhaps just a pleasure drive. And yet that is exactly what happens with people with disabilities that are relying on paratransit or perhaps a family or a friend to be with them and take them wherever they need to go. And so what those of us in the disability community endure on a daily basis is not what those who are making these regulations in general have to put up with. And so it seems to me that it is illogical to impose a monitoring type condition on a technology that thus far is proving itself to be incredibly competent. I have personally spent hours and hours in autonomous vehicles, only a little bit of that time myself behind the wheel as the operator of the vehicle, but I've been granted the opportunity to be in the vehicles a great deal. I have never felt unsafe. I have always been able to describe my experience in autonomous vehicles as it is like riding with a very good driver. And so I believe that the language of the draft statutes or the draft regulations imposes an unnecessary requirement, and I believe an illogical requirement that is discriminatory when it comes to those of us that would not be, would not and could not be granted a driver's license by the DMV under current regulations.
Thank you. And we recognize, and it's been our statement, for the past 3 years, we recognize the safety case for autonomous vehicles. We also recognize the mobility aspects of what autonomous technology can allow, not only for the disabled, but for the elderly. And really what our mission is to get to that point, to get satisfied that the vehicles are ready to be out there and to operate that way. And that's the purpose of this session today. I don't know if any one of the manufacturers would stand up and say, we've got a car that's ready to roll tomorrow that can operate completely independently. The point is we want to get there, but we want to get there in a way that it's safe for everybody. So we recognize that, I know that there were 32,719 people who were killed in auto accidents in 2013. And I know the statistics about the number of those accidents that were the result of a human error. I also know that in about 50% of those fatalities, the people didn't even have on a seatbelt. So, we do know the safety case, we do know the mobility case, but really what's going to help us get these regulations done is actually comments about the substantive text of the regulations, suggestions about the substantive text of the regulations. And so for us to get to that point where we actually have a regulation out there so that we can start allowing companies to deploy the vehicles, if we're going to get there, we're going to need language for the regulations. Yes. So I'm kind of putting that out there to everybody in the room. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and we appreciate it's a complex problem and appreciate the opportunity to participate in a workshop like this. Thank you.
Thank you. For the sake of time, one of the other big areas that we want to talk about is actually when we start talking about the manufacturer safety certifications and the issue of behavioral competencies for the vehicles. And so at this time, I'm going to move on to that subject matter because that is a big part of what our regulatory task is, how we go about being comfortable with the certifications that come to us from manufacturers that the vehicles are actually safe for operation. So I'm going to move on to that next area on our agenda, which are the vehicle safety certifications. The subjects are behavioral competencies, manufacturer safety certifications, and the third-party vehicle demonstration test. And for your ease, those are all found in sections 227.56 of the regulations, 227.58 and .60 of the regulations, and also on the document, which is the application, the OL 318. So I'd like to invite people to come forward now and to give us their comments on those subjects that are stated in the regulations. Over here on my left.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Anders Jensen. I work at Volvo Car Corporation. And thank you for arranging this workshop, and thank you for letting us weigh in on your proposed regulation. I'm sorry I couldn't make a comment about the previous part because we had some serious concerns about the requirement for monitoring. And
go ahead.
We think, not talking about levels of technology, we think it's very important to look at what do we want to offer to consumers. And we'll listen to the people, the blind people and the people with disabilities being able to be mobile. And we have great concerns about that, and we think we should be able to supply technologies for those people. But it's also about consumers who spend a lot of time in congested situations, not being able to use the time in the vehicle. We want to offer that time for people to use instead of just letting it go, that's just being stuck in some uncomfortable situations. So we think for tomorrow it's necessary to go ahead with regulations that can offer possibility for people to use the time in the vehicle. For drivers who sit and do nothing can use that time. Moving on to third-party certification. We are, as a manufacturer, and like I also make a comment, sorry, about redundancies. There was a gentleman asking about redundancies. Yes, there would be redundancies, absolutely. That's key to the development of autonomous technologies. We need to have redundancies. So, yes. Third-party certification, we are not so pleased with this proposal in your draft for the proposal. We think that we need to know beforehand what the requirements are. We also need to know that these requirements are objective, and we can pass, if we have worked towards the requirements, we know that we're going to pass. Handing over to a third-party certification authority that we have no experience of before and that we don't know requirements. We have to design for a couple of years and then hand over to a third-party certifier who can look at this and have totally different opinion what's necessary. And also, we don't know if this is going to be a common platform for all manufacturers. Maybe some manufacturers hand over to a different entity for certification. It could be differences between the evaluations between different entities. And having objective platform for certification is necessary for getting the same not to give competitive advantage to some manufacturers over others. So we are very concerned about this proposal.
And we appreciate that comment. One of the biggest struggles for us for the past few years, even as we pointed out at the workshop last year, is how do you come up with those objective standards? And so what we have been reaching out and what we've been struggling to get some input on is what should those objective standards be? As you know, I think I've mentioned in the past, I'm an attorney at DMV. I am not an automotive engineer, and so for me, I can't come up with those standards, and we don't have people on staff that can come up with those standards. And so if the concern is that the regulations don't specify enough about what are the objective standards that the third party is going to be using, we would really like to use this as an opportunity to give us some suggestions on what those should be.
We're happy to come back to you with written comments and written suggestions on this issue.
That would be excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next.
Good morning. My name is Emily Frascaroli, and I'm here speaking on behalf of Ford Motor Company. First of all, I'd like to say that Ford truly appreciates the opportunity to comment on the draft deployment regulations developed by the California Department of Motor Vehicles. At Ford, we've been focused on developing fully autonomous vehicles for more than a decade. It's a very serious business for us. Probably some of you heard we recently announced Ford is tripling the size of our fully autonomous vehicle testing fleet, and we're accelerating our on-road testing to further advance our own self-driving or virtual driver software capability. But we fully share your goal of enhancing safety for all road users. But we believe that all stakeholders, including regulators, should strive to ensure that we don't frustrate, slow, or prohibit the deployment of innovative technologies by creating a patchwork of requirements across various jurisdictions. With this in mind, we would encourage California to work closely with NHTSA and other stakeholders on a 50-state rule. We believe uniform nationwide standards will enhance safety for all Americans, provide certainty moving forward for manufacturers, and aid in the quick and efficient deployment of autonomous vehicle technology. If you'll indulge me a little bit, I just want to make a few comments about the operator requirements.
Sure.
So with respect to the operator requirements, we're concerned that the prohibition on vehicles that are capable of operation without a driver in the vehicle will be an inhibitor to the revolutionary opportunities fully autonomous vehicles may provide. I think we've heard a lot of comments in that regard today. Senate Bill 1298 clearly allowed for the possibility of driverless vehicles, and we would encourage you to go back and look at that. You asked for specific changes. I would suggest dropping exemption 5 from section 227.52 in its entirety. Likewise, we also see a need for longer-term planning horizon and more extensive vision for fully autonomous vehicles. There's a continuum of technologies that are encompassed by your regulations. Some of the requirements that you've proposed make more sense when talking about SAE Level 3 vehicles than they do when talking about SAE Level 4 vehicles. They seem overly restrictive and somewhat short-sighted. On a related note, I guess I would say a requested change would be, we'd like to see you draw the use of the SAE automation levels within the regulation. I think we would propose that would add a uniform and consistent understanding of the expected functionality of vehicles, and I think you could easily add that to your definition section what SAE levels you're specifically referring to.
I think the only problem with that is that, then you get to that discussion, is it SAE levels or is it NHTSA levels? And since the vehicles have to meet the safety standards required by NHTSA, wouldn't it be more appropriate if we did that to adopt what are the NHTSA levels as opposed to the SAE levels?
I see the conundrum. I think from the industry perspective, we've spent a lot of time working on the SAE levels, and across the industry are very comfortable with those, but I understand your position. I think it would be better to clarify, at least at one level. Using terms like autonomous doesn't provide a lot of definition, which is why there's been so much effort put into developing levels, because it helps bring clarity to what it is that you're actually talking about. Then just briefly with respect to certification, established OEMs have a long history of successfully working within a self-certification framework for compliance of vehicle systems subject to NHTSA standards and regulations. We have a concern that the third-party certification proposed by your draft regulations will inhibit growth and innovation on a broad scale, and we would strongly encourage you to continue this discussion, particularly with NHTSA and DOT, and work towards resolution on a national level.
I would encourage, I know there's a lot of manufacturers in the room, and some of that confusion comes from the way you actually speak of the technology. I saw a commercial where a car stopped, and the advertising tag was that it has autonomous braking. And so, as you start talking about the technology, that also adds to the confusion, because here in California, our statute doesn't define it as that way. That's just an emergency braking feature. So, we hear your concern about maybe our regulations creating some confusion. You manufacturers also have some responsibilities of making sure that the public isn't confused about it.
I totally agree with you. I often say that marketing people love to use terms like autonomous, and engineers love to use terms like automated.
Exactly.
We need to find a way to work with both. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning. Matt Schwal with Tesla. Many of the topics that we're discussing today, probably most of the topics that we're discussing today, relate to going back to whether or not we should encourage or discourage the adoption of autonomous vehicles. I spent my career prior to Tesla investigating car accidents, and I completely agree that our focus here should be on safety. We know the safety statistics, we know how humans perform, and we're fortunate to be looking forward to a future where there's a safer alternative. Not all of us here in this room agree on when we're going to get to that safer alternative, but we can all agree that at some point, cars are going to be unequivocally proven to be safer than human-driven cars. Autonomous cars will be safer than human-driven cars. And for safety's sake, we should all hope that that point comes during the term of these regulations. So the regulations should be crafted with that possibility in mind. Therefore, if I can I go back to the discussion on licensing drivers?
Yes.
Prohibiting autonomous vehicles that are capable of operating without the presence of a driver is sort of analogous to prohibiting a minivan from carrying more than one passenger. What you're doing is taking away one of the most compelling features, and we've had some really great statements today about how compelling that feature is. So fewer consumers would purchase these vehicles, and manufacturers wouldn't invest as much in their development. Now, some have suggested that we need someone in the car for safety reasons, but I'm talking about a point where autonomous cars have been proven to be safer than humans. Therefore, the blatant prohibition against operating without an operator is unnecessary, and what it does is it serves to discourage the autonomous vehicles and delay the safety benefits.
One thing I'll point out is, one of our concerns as we go forward is making sure that the public knows the limitations of the technology. We've seen many, videos posted on the internet when technologies are pushed, and then people push it beyond what its intended limits are. A lot of the stuff that we have out there on the roads now are basically adaptive cruise control with a lane keep type function, and that public perception of I've got a self-driving car leads to some pretty, hairy consequences. So we hear what you're saying, but part of that developmental process, this phase-in process, is making sure not only that the technology is fostered, but that people know the limitations of what it can do.
Actually, one further point. We kind of skipped over the manufacturer driver operator training plan. Can I make a comment about
Go
that?
ahead, yeah.
Manufacturers should definitely provide training on how to use automated vehicles, but we feel that the additional certificate requirement is unnecessary. And to see why it's unnecessary, we can look at the changes that the automobile has undergone in the last 100 years. During this time, drivers have proven again and again that they can adapt and learn these new features without having to go to the DMV and get a certificate to prove it. There are lots of examples, but let's consider anti-lock brakes, because they're all something we can relate to. The introduction of ABS required that drivers unlearn training about how to operate brakes during an emergency stop. Yet drivers adapted and learned without getting a special certificate. Now someone might point out that ABS really just makes braking easier, but the same point can be made for autonomous technologies. They make driving easier. We can also see this special certificate is unnecessary by looking at the range of vehicles that a California driver can currently operate. With my regular Class C license, I can drive a nice stable vehicle, or I could operate a 40-foot motorhome or tow a 10,000-pound trailer. And driving a motorhome or towing a big trailer both clearly require special skills and training. And I'll admit right now, I'd need some practice before I felt comfortable doing either of those. But the DMV trusts me with my Class C license to learn what I need to do before doing that, without requiring that I go get a special certificate.
Let me ask you, because, and then I have to refer back to those videos, when we see the introduction of something, how are we, as the DMV, going to make sure that you, driver who is operating that vehicle, knows enough about the technology and not to use it in a way that endangers someone else? And so the whole point of having something is at least we would know that you, manufacturer, trained the person or someone train that driver on this technology, and then we can be able to put it out there. I mean, you know, one thing that's going to happen, and I think I heard a comment earlier today about the age of the average vehicle in California. It's not going to be overnight that every person owns an autonomous vehicle. There is going to be a phase-in period, and those vehicles are going to be on the road with a lot of other cars that don't have autonomous technology. And at least from what we've seen so far, the technology, as it's being phased in, isn't being introduced in the cars that all of us can buy. I think just about every model out there that has, you know, for example, the lane keep and the adaptive cruise control, they're in cars that cost well over $50,000. And so those cars, at least the first cars we're going to see out there, are going to be on the road for quite a long time with other vehicles that aren't automated. And so really what we're looking at is how can we make sure, how can DMV be comfortable that the driver that's operating that vehicle knows properly how to operate it and what to do with the technology such that it doesn't endanger them and other people on the roads.
That's certainly a very important point, but as you pointed out, that point is not unique to the type of vehicles that are covered in this regulation.
Right, but
so
our only
therefore-
problem is we have a statutory obligation to adopt regulations that we feel have enough in it to ensure that the vehicles are safe to operate on public roads. And that's been our problem.
Okay, I think absolutely there needs to be good instruction, but that's not unique, and there's nothing unique about autonomous vehicles that require some special certification beyond what's beyond other technologies on cars.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. Thank you. Mr. Simpson?
John Simpson from Consumer Watchdog. I wanted to speak to 2 points here on the certifications. First of all, it may be my total ineptitude, but I'm having difficulty finding the full list of behavioral competencies.
Right.
You talk about Form OL 318 Part B. Is that available? Does that list?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is it available here today, or I would hope?
Yes.
So then the other thing then is the question of third-party certification. I support that notion very strongly. We think you've probably pretty much got it right in the regs that it's necessary. And I think if you look at the auto industry as a whole, most of corporate America is under certain sorts of pressure to rush things into market. And if you look at the auto industry and the number of recalls and all that sort of thing, Takata airbags, and so on and on and on, I think it shows that sometimes the manufacturers don't get it right, and they succumb to pressure to get things out there first. So I think in this case, certainly the company's going to be comfortable and not want to go forward until they're comfortable. But I think another test by an independent third party, when it's a technology that as groundbreaking as this is absolutely necessary. Now, the thing I start to worry about then next, and we might want to tweak some of the regulations on, is if you get essentially a bunch of favored third parties who really aren't third parties and are in lockstep with the people that they're reviewing. I think you've got some good certifications in here that they've never done business together and not partners, don't own each other. That's all important. So an independent third-party certification is absolutely essential, and I think experience elsewhere in the audio industry demonstrates that.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Timothy Papandreou. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. We're very excited, very interested, very concerned. We have about 11 companies testing on our streets right now. Some of them tell us, some of them don't tell us, but we've got most of them, I think. If you haven't told me yet, please tell me that you're testing on our streets. The thing that we're looking at these regulations, there's a bit of deja vu here for us. And the reason I want to say is because we had a very similar situation with the transportation network companies. And these are the Ubers and the Lyfts and that sort of stuff. I agree with the person who made the comment from Ford that it's really important that we have the state and federal regs sync, because it affects the city, how we operate our streets, really, and it makes it difficult to figure out which one we go first. So I would strongly recommend that the synchronization of those two pieces are important. We're applying for a grant with the federal government right now to test things in San
Are
Francisco.
you applying for the Smart City grant?
Maybe. So we're looking for partners. And so it's very important for us to make sure that the guidelines are consistent so we can actually meet the objectives of the federal government while satisfying the state
I
government.
think you manufacturers, did you hear him?
Yeah.
For partners.
The question that I have some questions on the actual language itself. The area that we're seeing a lot of inconsistency is on autonomous versus automated. And so just choose one and stick with it and make it consistent, but it's difficult for us to talk to our public without knowing which one we're actually talking about, because they have different opinions on what automated means versus what autonomous means. We strongly believe in the focus on safety. We're one of the first Vision Zero cities in the world to really push comprehensive traffic safety in our city, and our goal is 0 deaths and fatalities in less than 10 years. We believe this is a path to get us there, and there's a lot of work to do there. We also think it's a path towards affordable housing, because this can actually free up space on our streets, reduce the demand for parking, which can actually free up our space and allow us to do more affordable uses of our spaces and more green spaces. So think of this as actually, it's a mechanism to get us towards sustainable cities, which is an imperative for the state. The levels is a real challenge for us to articulate this to our public who don't understand this. What they understand is levels. For example, our bike lanes have class 1, 2, and 3, makes perfect sense. Level of service, A is good, F is bad. So just let's think about how to make it simple so we can actually articulate to our community. And I understand these regulations are very important to move forward. Our culture in our city is about performance standards. We usually focus on outcomes, and the regulatory requirement is we try and keep it as flexible in a brand new area. You've got a tough job. I'm not excusing the role that you have to do here. But I think as we look at these particular areas, I would like to on that 227.4 for reporting accidents, we would like you to consider using the word collisions. These are not accidents, and we've worked very hard with our police department, and we have 25 cities across the country are trying to remove the word accident and use collision just for consistency. So consider that. Also, the notifying database, it would be really interesting if we could actually be part of that notification as well. We've had a few collisions in San Francisco where didn't really know what to do, so it would be good to know that what the procedure is and if the city could actually share from that database as well. On 227.48, when you talk about public roads, I think it's important to think about public access. Some of our streets are technically not public, so we're not sure what applies in those circumstances. If it's a gated situation, is that road public or is it not? So just to clarify.
Yeah, for things like that, you really have to go by what the definitions
The vehicle
are
code, right.
in the vehicle code. What is a street or highway?
Okay.
It's those traditional definitions because that's, the definitions that we have to work from where our regulatory authority goes.
Okay, thank you for that. Sorry, I'm going to go through this. And that whole third-party certification and testing that you've been certified, most of this is about ownership and owning vehicles, and we're transitioning very fast to a shared model where people are sharing services and they're not actually owning the vehicle. So I would strongly recommend considering what that looks like for someone who gets into a shared vehicle. Do they download something on their app? Does the car's screen say you need to go through a tutorial? Like, what does that actually look like? Because there's going to be an issue of what does the customer actually have to do to certify that they understand the rules of the situation that they're in. The shared mobility piece is going to be very important, I think. And then I think on the third-party vehicle demonstration test, when they have to report traffic environment, you say including traffic density, vehicles, pedestrians, and signage. Unless you mean unless bicycles are vehicles, I'd make it explicit that they need to show what the situation was for bicycling as well. That's where we've seen some of the issues that have popped up. And I believe that is going to the next section.
Don't worry, if you miss anything, we're going to be here for a while today.
I think we're good. But I just wanted to close and say that we're a culture of innovation in San Francisco. We're really looking forward to this. We're interested to move this forward. We know that there's a lot of things that we can't do by rules and regs alone. We have to actually try things out. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage a little bit of iterative approach to learn, see, act, apply. That's our culture, and that's how we've learned to do a lot of the innovations that have actually spread across the world. So something to consider. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On the, just a few comments about the consistency of regulations across the nation. Right. We just want to point out that California has been working very closely with NHTSA on this issue. And in fact, there is a group made up of various states that are working on model policy, and California is very much part of that. And so we are part of an effort to get to the point where we can have consistency across all of the jurisdictions in our country.
Yeah, because I just imagine a scenario in Lake Tahoe and what happens when you go across to Nevada. So it's one of those things.
I think one thing Bernard didn't point out, actually that group is an international group because
right.
we're also, a lot of innovation is going on up in Canada. And so, part of the considerations, even when we speak about, across the United States, but it's also, across our neighbors.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. I just wanted to close by saying that we're interested in working with you guys as well to figure out what the next steps are and moving forward for deployment in San Francisco.
Thank you. We will be in touch.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, my name is Dan Bartz. I'm independent, representing myself. I've done a lot of work over the last decade and a half on this area, and more recently working with the United States Army and members of SAE on trying to develop a framework for fault tolerance. And the area that I maybe want to ask for some thought on is on 227.58, looking at C, who talks about the tests for the operational conditions of the automated vehicle. Automakers are very good at designing systems that please the customer, but I think looking at the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 105, which is the braking standard, focuses mostly on how does the brake system perform when there is a failure and what is the brakes expected to do. So I think a performance-based test based on what is the expectation for these vehicles when there are detected failures would greatly help understand the scope of the development of the fault detection and fault recovery systems. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Pringle? Oh, I'm sorry, it's Augustine.
Kurt Augustine.
You see the name Kurt? And
Fair enough. I've been called worse.
Not by me.
I'm Kurt Augustine with the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, and we do certainly recognize that the DMV has an incredible challenge here to implement the statute, and there are a lot of issues that are facing you. And I said, in this portion, I will speak to the third-party certification, and as you've asked in the past, we'll submit written comments as well, too. However, on the third-party certification, this is pretty straightforward. The statute does not require third-party certification. We do not believe that third-party certification is necessary to implement this technology on the roads of California. It's been the experience of the established automakers that we have successfully worked with self-certification frameworks for complying with the federal motor safety vehicle standards for years. The self-certification standards established by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or I'll use the acronym NHTSA, sets out objective standards and clearly defines test methods. The federal self-certification system has functioned well for many decades and has allowed automotive technologies to emerge that have helped reduce traffic injuries and fatalities. Some of these technologies you've mentioned earlier yourself today: adaptive cruise control, forward collision warning, lane departure technologies. That is why the Alliance and its member companies request that the DMV continue to rely on NHTSA's motor vehicle certification enforcement programs for the whole vehicle compliance. And it's not just really how it operates on the road, but it is really a matter of fact and law. It has been established for more than 4 decades, and it's absolutely settled that federal law says that state DMVs are preempted from requiring any analysis or verification of the federal motor vehicle standards beyond the procedures that Congress has provided in the Safety Act.
I hear you. Let me ask you a question, because you mentioned the statute. And the statute says that we have to get certain certifications. And so in 38750 subdivision C 1 big E, it says, the autonomous vehicle's autonomous technology meets federal motor vehicle safety standards for the vehicle's model year and for all other applicable state safety standards and performance requirements set forth in state and federal law and regulations promulgated pursuant to those laws. And what we've been scratching our heads over for the past 3 years is, what are the federal motor vehicle safety standards for autonomous technology?
And that's a beautiful segue into my next point. You mentioned, Bernard mentioned it himself, you're working with the federal government. It is our position as that, especially with the recent developments by Department of Transportation Secretary Fox, saying that he's encouraging both the Department of Transportation and NHTSA to work with the states to develop these standards. We believe that on this issue that the state of California should wait and for those standards to be developed.
But if we do that, then that means that we'll have nothing for several years. And so we've got a statute that seems to, we've jumped the federal gun, but what I hear you saying is we shouldn't have a deployment until the federal government comes up with those safety standards. And so, I'm not aware of a rulemaking right now where they're coming up with those safety standards.
Well, I think that, and I am not a lawyer, so I'm not going to engage this, and I'll let our written comments, but the absence of a law does not mean that you are not in compliance with that law.
Well, I guess since we can't approve an application until someone certifies to us that their vehicle makes a standard, and that's been the problem with us for the past couple of years, there isn't that standard. So what do we do in the absence? And it sounds like what you're saying is that we should wait until there is that standard, which would mean that we wouldn't be able to approve an application until the feds come around with coming up with that federal motor vehicle safety standard.
Well, again, I'll rely on our written comments to more articulate this, but these vehicles are on the road today legally without those federal standards. So clearly, it's meeting federal standards for these vehicles to be operated in the United States right now.
But the ones that are operating now, under our statute's definition of an autonomous vehicle, they're not considered to be autonomous.
Well,
I know, it's a tough question.
Again, and I'll go back to the
feel
other,
you.
I'll refer to other comments. We don't really know what the definition of autonomous is. So.
I can tell you, it
Okay.
is.
Well, and I can tell you too. I think what's
An
important.
autonomous
we'll-
vehicle means any vehicle equipped with autonomous technology that has been integrated into the vehicle. An autonomous vehicle does not include a vehicle that is equipped with one or more collision avoidance systems, including but not limited to electronic blind spot assistance, automated emergency braking systems, park assist, adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist, lane departure warning, traffic jam and queuing assist, or other similar systems that enhance safety or provide driver assistance but are not capable of collectively or singularly driving the vehicle without the active control or monitoring of a human operator. So that's the definition of what is and what is not autonomous.
I'm not sure how you want me to reply to that, so I
You
appreciate.
said there's no
the,
definition, and I thought
yeah.
I'd point out that the
Okay.
statute
All
does
right, well, I
provide one.
appreciate that this has now turned into a debate society as opposed to a workshop.
Well,
but we'll,
the point is-
as you've asked numerous times, we'll submit our written comments and explain our, to the fullest extent that we can address your regulation.
The
Thank
reason
you.
why it's a debate is that if we're going to come up with a regulation at the end of the day that gets us with a proposal that we can put forward to get the vehicles on the road, then we're going to need some concrete input. You know, I always joke, my dad used to say, it's real easy, you know, it just takes one wrecking ball a few seconds to tear a house down. But it takes a whole crew of people quite a long time to build the house. And that's what we've been trying to do for the last couple of years. And so, you know, it's easy to come up and tell us what's wrong with the regs, then tell us how to fix them, and tell us what's right. And that's how we're going to get to a proposal sometime this year that we can put out for adoption.
I'm Rosemary Shahan, President of Consumers for Auto Reliability and Safety. And there are things that are right with the proposed regs from our point of view and that we really appreciate. And, you know, to address the question about behavioral competencies and vehicle safety certifications, we strenuously support requiring the autonomous vehicles to meet not only federal motor vehicle safety standards, but also compliance standards so that they can be operated safely in the weather conditions that we experience in California. And there's a real problem that hasn't been addressed yet by the proponents of you know, leaping off the cliff with the autonomous cars in a very speedy fashion, and that is that these are vehicles that do not operate safely in weather conditions that we experience in California, such as heavy rain, when we are blessed with it, and snow, when we're blessed with that, and also fog. And so this is one reason why we believe also that it's important for the operators to have special training so that they know the limitations of the vehicles that they're going to be operating. And we understand from news reports that, for instance, Ford Motor Company has only fairly recently started testing autonomous cars in the snow. And you can imagine scenarios where people set out thinking the weather's going to be sunny, and sometimes the weather reports are not 100% accurate. And they may end up in circumstances where, you know, you go over a hill in San Francisco and suddenly there's a fog bank. Then what happens? And I asked the reporter that, and he said, well, then the car parks itself. This is San Francisco. You can't
Are you gonna
assume.
figure some parking spaces?
Right, you can't assume there's any parking space, right? You know, there are real questions about the safe operation of these vehicles under all weather conditions. We believe that before they get out of the test phase, they should demonstrate through third-party certification that they are safe under all road conditions, because, as you pointed out, cars last a lot longer than they used to. The average age of the car on the road right now is 11.4 years. And you're going to have cars that, as they get older, people are going to be driving them who may not fully understand, you know, this car has certain limitations, and they need to know that. So we favor the training. We favor having the operators required to be in the cars. We noted that the DMV requested and received information from the manufacturers of autonomous vehicles, where they themselves said that in their experimental use of them, there have been thousands of times when the human beings in the cars had to take control to prevent a collision. So that is a very compelling argument for having people in the car and also having them trained so that they know you can't zone out when you're driving this car. And you also have to be a skilled driver. You can't be someone who gets in the car and just tells the car where you want to go. You have to be someone who can take control of the car in an emergency situation. You can't just like read stock quotes and look at sports scores and expect that you're going to be capable of taking control of this car should you need to do that in an emergency situation. You have to be cognizant of what's going on the road. And driving is a skill that, you know, takes a lot of time to learn and learn well. And so those people need to have that level of skill and that level of awareness. And as far as the, I know someone from Tesla mentioned anti-lock brakes. When you look at the history of anti-lock brakes, there were actually a lot of problems with people who thought that they still had to pump those brakes. And they didn't know that this was different technology that operated differently. And there were collisions. In fact, we worked with the Insurance Institute of Driveway Safety, and we were very much in favor of putting anti-lock brakes into cars. And yet, you know, there were circumstances where people didn't fully understand, you know, this is a different technology, it's different from what you were trained. And when people have been operating cars a certain way for a number of years, there's a learning curve. We are human beings. We need a little programming ourselves sometimes. So we should recognize that. And just to say more broadly, you know, we were really hopeful when autonomous cars came around that the tech community would work more with the safety community to do things like addressing loopholes in the safety recall system. And to me, that has been the biggest disillusioning disappointment of all, is that they profess to be pro-safety, but they have done nothing to close loopholes like car dealers, like CarMax, which are selling unsafe recall
I
cars
hear
in
you,
our
but
state.
that's straying a little bit beyond what we are here to
I
accomplish today.
understand that.
so
I just could not
thank you.
resist it's getting that in the record that, you know, we have real problems with the existing safety recall system.
Sure.
It's not adequate to address the problem.
Right,
which
but
is
I
an
can't fix
argument
that
for-
in these regs.
Right.
so.
It's like an argument for California, though, to do kind of what you do with air quality. You know, California actually has an opportunity to be a leader in safety when it comes to autonomous cars, and we're hoping that you will do everything you can. One other point on liability that's been mentioned by others, and that is that we're concerned about making the guinea pigs liable for the results of the experiment. You know, if someone does not have control of the car, they should not have liability, period.
Thank you. I know I said earlier we're going to take a break for lunch at noon, and I want to keep to that. So there are, it looks like 4 people that want to speak. If you can, when we come back from the lunch break at 1 o'clock, come on up, and we'll take your comments right as soon as we get back. So we're going to take the lunch break now, and we will start again promptly at 1 o'clock. Thank you. Seems to have lost about half of our audience. But there were a couple of gentlemen that had comments that they wanted to make before we went to the lunch break, so I'm going to go ahead and invite them to come on up now. So.
Will do. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Chuck Ernst. I am the Director of Transportation at Sacramento City Unified School District here in Sacramento. And I'm kind of new to the stage here with the automated cars, or whatever you want to call them, the driverless cars. I wanted to talk to you just for a minute. What I'm about to talk to probably falls under, I was looking at the draft regulations, the dynamic driving tasks Section C in paragraph J. But California has over 25,000 school buses daily that travel across our roadways. Nationwide, there's 450,000, probably over that. I've been in this business for over 33 years. One of the biggest problems we see are red light runners. People just cruising through our red lights all the time when we're trying to cross students or at any time our red lights are on. I want to just kind of make sure, or at least it's probably already been talked about with these cars, but I want to make sure the vehicles follow California Vehicle Code 22454. Basically, specifically stopping for school buses displaying flashing red light system and stop arm. I also want to find out, eventually, will the vehicle be able to identify when not to stop when a school bus displays a red light system, with the car coming in one direction, the bus going in the other direction, and there's a center divide that would require that the car not stop. I don't know if these cars are developed or designed to see that, especially identifying a school bus, identifying red lights on the bus. Also, possibly either through a malfunction maybe with the bus or a driver error, the red light's coming on intermittently down the street. Will the automated car just suddenly stop because it sees the red lights, if it's designed to do so? Anyway, I would like to encourage all the groups to work with the California Highway Patrol, and transportation officials nationwide and in the state to ensure that the safety of the school children remain priority with these cars. Thank you.
Those are really good points. And just so you know, we when we started the task, we formed a statewide steering committee. And so part of our statewide steering committee is the California Highway Patrol, as well as Caltrans. And so we actually get input from them. And one of the things that we strive for is making sure that the vehicles are programmed to obey all traffic laws. And you know, there's that transitional phase. You know, what does that necessarily mean? But we do want to make sure that the vehicles are equipped for all safety scenarios.
Exactly. And with 25,000 school buses, I mean, a school bus is basically a moving stop sign.
Yeah.
So with 25,000 of them out there daily making between 10 and 20 stops a day, that's a lot of different stop signs that could pop up anywhere.
Sure.
And that's what my concern is.
Thank you. I know there were three other gentlemen that were right before the lunch, and so.
I was one of them.
Excellent.
It's a good lunch, thank you. My name is Jonathan Moore. I work for a business. It's a company called Autonomous Solutions, and we automate vehicles. I got two areas I'd like to talk about. The first is 22752 and Part 5 of that. This excludes vehicles that are capable of operation without the presence of an operator inside the vehicle. One of the products we're developing is for off-highway use, and I realize that's not part of the area's operation that you have specified. However, I'd be grateful if you'd consider an exemption to that clause, which would allow vehicles that are clearly designed for off-road use to cross the area of operation, the road, if that was, say, at 90 degrees in a manual mode or in a non-autonomous mode. So this is a vehicle that meets the requirements of an autonomous vehicle in that it's capable of doing that, but it's going to go across there at 90 degrees to get from one field to the other. So it would be, the words would be, except if its intended use is off-road, a licensed operator may cross the area's operation at 90-degree angle only. And that's similar language to other statutes in other documents. The second point, I'd like to just return to a point that Matt made, and maybe just to broaden the scope of people that are allowed to operate autonomous vehicles. We've heard from a number of people, and we've had requests to consider the mobility of everybody, and that might be people who are not able to drive. And that really is the point of automation, is to make all of us unable to drive. When we get through the examination at a young age, we heard from people making it clear that part of being a good driver is practicing driving, and obviously autonomous mode removes your practice of driving. And so I think it'd be prudent to be considering the possibility of allowing people that are not licensed, or people like myself who have just got out of the practice of driving, being able to operate an autonomous vehicle, because I would like to operate an autonomous vehicle, even though I've not driven that highway for the last 6 years or however long, because it's been in autonomous mode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Rob Heilman. It's a company called VQuest, though I'm providing support to the Department of Defense, specifically an organization within the Office of the Secretary of Defense called the Test Management Resource Center, which has oversight of all the Department of Defense's test infrastructure around the country, for that matter, around the world. The head of that particular office is also the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Developmental Test and Evaluation. So that individual is responsible for all developmental testing across the Department of Defense. He has sponsored a study, which I am engaged in, to look across the horizon and look a bit far field and try to understand, do our best to identify the requirements for the infrastructure, the technologies, the capabilities, tools, the workforce, and the policy required to test and evaluate autonomous systems. We're in the midst of that study. We just completed the first of 3 phases, and I just wanted to share a couple of points that I thought were relevant to the discussion today. First, applaud the state of California and DMV for what you're doing and having this dialogue with the public. I think it's very important to allay some fears that are out there and some preconceptions. As you can imagine, the application, the implementation, the deployment of autonomous systems with the United States military has many considerations, many facets. We're covering that entire gamut, but I will just focus on a couple of key points here. The first is that we're trying to understand how is it that we evaluate these systems in a manner that we can build the body of evidence, right, that will enhance trust, understand, quantify, and mitigate risk, and then engender trust across what we call our constituency. So that includes, of course, the operator of the system. We're talking about the operator of the system. We have some kind of evolutionary approach to the human's influence over the system's behavior, starting with direct control, with many of the remote piloted vehicles that you have out there now, to supervision and tasking, okay, to actually mission management. And we're certainly moving towards mission management. There's still a human engaged. There's still a relationship between the human and the machine, but the human is not in control. Okay? When we gather that evidence, we're interested in understanding how we might be able to take a more community approach and have a cumulative body of evidence with organizations such as yours and organizations such as yours. The Department of Defense, of course, is going to be doing a lot of testing and gathering a tremendous amount of data on autonomy and autonomous systems, to include ground systems. There are a number of applications for vehicular autonomous systems for the United States military. If we're able to go ahead and share our data and perhaps our test methods, then perhaps we can do things that will accelerate the maturation of this technology and its implementation across the community at large. That is one point I wanted to make. A second point, and this one is a little more contentious within the building, the Pentagon, and that is understanding the degree with which, as evaluators, we need to understand, we need to have some degree of insight, some introspection into the eternal autonomous functions of the system under test. Okay? We're replacing the human operator with what I call digital cognition. So now we have a machine that's performing the functions of perception, reasoning, and decision making. Previously, when we tested our manned systems, we were always able to monitor, observe, query the human operator, who was trained for this particular system and a particular mission. We've now replaced all of that with an intelligent learning machine. Okay? So we no longer have that human to query or observe. So how do we gain the insight we need to ensure that these systems not just behaved appropriately, but understanding why they did what they did? Right? We can go ahead and immerse a system now in some kind of a fairly operationally representative controlled environment. We can stimulate that system with different test cases, right, different scenarios, and we can observe its behavior. Okay? But when you're talking about a non-deterministic system with an unbounded state space, we don't necessarily feel that that's adequate. Okay? So that's a very crude way of testing at a black box level. So if we're going to go ahead and achieve that first objective of engendering trust across that constituency, we probably need a higher degree of insight into the intent of the system, right? Not just what it performed, how it performed, right? But why did it make the decisions it made, and how did it make those decisions? And then how did that relate back to behavior? So those are two areas that we're particularly interested in. And then we get to the point of sharing. I talked about the test data. So and we've seen some frustration here today with some of my associates in the audience that the government isn't necessarily approaching this in a very consistent manner. And so we're interested in exploring with other agencies just how it is we can drive some consistency, some continuity in the holy grail of reciprocity across different governing agencies. And so, and with a lot of the autonomy that we're working on now within the Department of Defense, they like to call it platform agnostic. We take a degree of autonomy and we're able to put it on a multitude of platforms to service a multitude of missions. To be able to achieve that objective, we need some framework by which we're able to architect, design, and then analyze these systems. So that is what we're working towards, and we look forward to further collaboration with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to see if there were any further comments that people wanted to make about the regulations where they speak to the third-party vehicle demonstration test or the manufacturer safety certification requirements. Okay. We're going to move on to the next section of the agenda, which is captioned vehicle deployment, the provisional deployment permit term, the requirement that we have in the regulations that at least in the initial 3-year phase that the vehicles would only allow to either be run by the manufacturer or on a lease basis. And so we'd like to see if there are some comments on that section of the regulations. Go ahead, Tim.
Matt Schwal from Tesla Motors.
Thanks, Matt.
Regarding the lease requirement, based on the conversations I've had with you, my understanding is that the requirement's designed to achieve 2 goals. And I think that both of those goals could be achieved in other ways. The first goal, as I understand it, is to protect the consumer in case that autonomous technology has to be turned off. And what I'd suggest is instead a buyback requirement, where if the technology has to be turned off, there's some form of buyback for that autonomous feature. This would probably be better for the consumer than them having to sit out the remainder of their 36-month lease, and it would give them the option of being able to purchase a car. And the second goal, as I understand it, is a way to get the cars back, for the manufacturer to get the car back so they can get data off of it. A better alternative there is to simply require over-the-air data transmission.
You know, and one thing I was concerned about with this section is I know the way your company does innovations is it's sent out wirelessly, or it's an update of the software, and so that was our one concern when we talk about it's only a lease basis. At least you are equipped to, if it has to be turned off, you have the ability to turn it off, and so we wanted to make sure that there's some flexibility, and even if you had a comment or a suggestion on how we do that. And appreciate the suggestion about a buyback option. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
I'm Jacqueline Serna again with the Consumer Attorneys of California.
Welcome back.
Thank you. one of the questions raised by the ability to lease these vehicles is, will TNCs be able to lease them through this sort of program and allow them to be on the roads as Ubers or Lyfts? And if so, that raises issues for us with the insurance requirements. Currently, under the insurance, section 227.54, the DMV is allowing for self-insurance. Just last week, we saw San Francisco's yellow cab company declared bankruptcy, and they were permissibly self-insured. They have millions of dollars in judgments against them. So we feel that self-insurance actually isn't adequate in this situation towards meeting the $5 million requirement. And also, that same section references that the operator must still maintain insurance requirements under the vehicle code section. And if you look at that vehicle code section, it's actually the state's minimums. So that raises issues for us as to whether, if the person is unable to, let's say, take control of the vehicle in a situation where there's a malfunction or something like that, and then are they going to be then on the hook, and will they have only a 1530 policy, which is our state's minimum right now? It's over 40 years old and dangerously low. So we wanted to highlight those concerns that we have. There's a few other safety issues that I could wait or bring them up now.
Okay. I think it's a good comment about the manufacturer's insurance requirements. One of the things that we try to do is, if you no longer meet one of the requirements for having the deployment permit, is that if you no longer meet the financial responsibility requirements, we've tried to build into a reg's ability to cancel or suspend that permit. And that kind of keyed into our concerns about what happens to the people who bought the cars before. And so these kind of are wedded together. So we would be interested in your comments on that.
Okay, right. So a few points on that then. I will say, with the, I guess it kind of ties in. So I'll go into the data recording right now. We appreciate that you're requiring 30 seconds of the data to be recorded. However, looking at accidents and how they happen, or collisions, we learn a lot in the time leading up to and before an accident. So we recommended in our comment to increase that to 60 seconds before and after. And also, we understand that as technology moves forward, there will be more different sort of like radar recording or sound recording in the vehicle. So as that becomes available in the technology, we would also encourage that be captured within 60 seconds of a collision. And lastly, we would, this has to do more with privacy, which we'll get into later, but it's tied into the data that is recorded. We understand that you're trying to make it so that the regulations do not necessarily make this data the property of the manufacturer. We would like to see that clarified a little bit more, and we think that it should be made available to the consumer. In the case of an accident specifically, it's very, very helpful to know what happened, and also just make sure that it's in a usable format, that it doesn't matter what the equipment that you're using to open this data, that it's going to show you the same format of the data. And lastly, we would say that this should also apply to third-party testing and the recording data that they have. We think that makes sense to apply that equally. And I think that's it for these points that I wanted to make. Thank you.
I think it's, before you go, it's a really good point about what happens after the collision. I've heard that before from other engineers. It's like, really, you want to know what happened really after the accident. So do you think we would need to have as much as 30 seconds, or would even a smaller time frame help?
Our recommendation was 60 seconds.
Mm-hmm. So it would be like 30 before and 30 after?
No, 60 before and 60 after.
60 before and 60 after.
So just a minute. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. Would anyone else like to come up and speak? The area that we were talking about right now is the provisional deployment term, or the manufacturer-operated lease option. We also just spoke a couple of minutes about the reports regarding performance, safety, and usage, and that's one of the things that we're curious to hearing something about, because one of the requirements we have is that even as the vehicles are out there and the public's deploying, a requirement to report data to us. And is that workable? And if not, do people have suggestions? Point out to us that's not workable, so that we can go ahead and make sure that we address that. All right.
Hi, my name is Paul Damon from BMW. I just want to address the topic with the data recorder. You make a lot of references to Part 563.
Right.
And unfortunately, some of your clauses in there contradict what 563 says. So I'd recommend splitting that, having a data recorder that's separate. But as soon as you start referencing 563, which has a requirement for which data points need to be taken and for maximum of 5 seconds, you then start to contradict that. So I would recommend splitting that up. I do understand the idea behind it, that you want it. 563 does have a lot of good points in it that I think they should just be copied instead of direct reference. And also to the topic of the reporting, a little concerned with that. Currently with the EDRs that we have in our vehicles, the data that's in those recorders, those belong to the customers. Okay. And by reporting that data to you, it brings up a lot of privacy concerns, data privacy, because the customer, currently the customer gets to decide where that data goes. And if there's a subpoena or something, things can be handled differently. But as a general case, to just as soon as there's any sort of collision, to give that data to you, some customers may not want anybody to know that. It may be private, things like that. So we do definitely have some concerns with that, with data privacy.
Are you submitting written comments?
I will be sitting more specific.
It would be great in your comments if you point out those sections where we're in conflict.
Okay.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
John Simpson again with Consumer Watchdog. I'm Privacy Project Director, and we do indeed have privacy concerns. Nonetheless, and I understand what the gentleman from BMW was saying, it does seem to me that an appropriate path would be to require the data perhaps that's relevant to the incidents and the disengagements, but I think it could be provided on an anonymized basis or something like that. I mean, it does seem to me that it's critical that information be made available without necessarily tying it to a particular individual. I think that might be a solution that would work. I'm not sure.
Thank you. I think since we've been talking about the privacy and cybersecurity requirements, I'd like to hear if, actually, I see a gentleman who wanted to make a comment before we went to lunch, just came back in. And so I'm going to give him the opportunity to come on up right now. Go ahead, Ralph.
My name is Ralph Ong. I'm representing myself this afternoon as a private individual. I'll note that I serve on the Society of Automotive Engineers On-Road Automated Vehicles Standards Committee. I'm one of the co-authors, co-contributors on the J3016 document, which is SAE's levels of automation, which was discussed earlier today. So I'm one of the folks you can blame for that. And what I wanted to comment on today is the requirements that you have regarding the operator's requirement to be trained on overriding the system in the event of a cyber attack. So what I would like to suggest is that the department consider a provision such that the vehicle itself should have a autonomous function, quote unquote, demonstration feature that allows the operator to observe the working of that autonomous feature or function without engaging the system or before engaging the system. This would allow them, for example, to actually perhaps determine that they were under a cyber attack, or that even more simply that there was a malfunction. So it would be just kind of a demonstration capability for the feature. So I think this would speak to the issue also of trust, which another gentleman raised earlier, which I think is very important.
Would that be more like a warning before the person activates the technology that there's a cyber threat to it?
Something like that, or just maybe the ability to demonstrate that feature without engaging it on the road, putting the vehicle under the control of the automated system to be able to test out that feature or demonstrate it. Not comprehensively, but just very simply, so that an operator, a user, would have that ability, a consumer, to see, is my automated feature malfunctioning, or is it not working for other reasons?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Paul Scullion with Global Automakers. I'll just sort of echo some of the comments that we heard earlier this morning about the importance of definitions, because I think it is something we need to carefully think about it so that we're all sort of talking the same language and referring to the same types of different technology. Just related to specifics in the draft regulations, basically it includes a requirement that manufacturers define and certify the operational capabilities and restricted conditions of the vehicle.
Can I just ask you to pull it?
Sure. So in the draft regulation, the DMV seeks to define and restrict areas of operation based on population density and limited roadway classifications. And these are not necessarily the conditions that vehicle systems or sensors will use to sort of monitor the surrounding environment. So while it's important that the vehicle's capabilities are understood and communicated to the driver, I think the general approach is both somewhat arbitrary. So manufacturers should have the flexibility to define operational characteristics and the roadway conditions and driving scenarios for which the functionality is provided, irrespective of the geographic characteristics and population density, because it will change based on whatever the certain area might be. Automated vehicles technology, as we heard this morning, is much broader than the concept of self-driving cars, and a number of vehicles on the road already provide some automated functionality, such as the automatic emergency braking that we talked about. So it's really a continuum from level 0 as the SAE or NHTSA would define, right up to level 4 or 5. These systems may be designed to provide support to the driver only in certain situations, and vehicle control is not typically sustained over an extended period of time. And the draft regulation, irrespective of the level of automation, does not sufficiently address circumstances where the automated vehicle features may be activated or deactivated by the driver, and therefore there shouldn't be arbitrary limitations on where a particular vehicle can be driven just because it's equipped with the technology, because it may not be activated or de-engaged by the customer or the driver. So in regards to vehicle behavior, we're still reviewing the behavioral competency documents, but it's sort of unclear to the extent the interaction between the behavioral competencies and the requirement that manufacturers certify that an automated vehicle's technology is designed to detect and respond to roadway situations in compliance with all provisions of the California Code and local regulations applicable to the operation of motor vehicles. So it's really important to understand the extent to which existing laws impede the ability of the automated vehicle to operate in all of the sort of driving situations that may be encountered by the vehicle while operating on public roads. So if there's a conflict with the behavioral competencies to the safe operation or possibly avoiding a collision, those are things to try to consider. We don't have specific recommendations at this time. We're still sort of reviewing the document. I think we're interested in becoming engaged in providing feedback in that instance. So obviously we recognize the significant challenges for your team in developing test procedures for evaluating the performance of the systems. And obviously research is ongoing to understand whether any standardized processes can be adopted at this stage. But we urge caution for the DMV as they may establish a precedent with unforeseen consequences in other states and jurisdictions. So it's important that any process be thoroughly vetted and go sort of through the broad stakeholder engagement, just because I think what the work you're doing could be looked at by other states and sort of by default create a model. So we plan to provide feedback on behavioral competencies at a later date. Just a few more issues related to third-party certification. So generally, as we've heard from some other manufacturers and trade associations today, we're opposed to the DMV's proposal that would seek to establish third-party certification. It represents basically a significant departure from the established self-certification model used by NHTSA. And the proposal sort of creates an unnecessary process that is not well defined and may not provide consistent, repeatable, or reproducible testing to assess the performance of automated vehicle systems. Basically, the third-party approach outlined would essentially establish arguably an unnecessary and to some extent self-regulated certification industry that will obviously have a direct impact on the pace of innovation. As vehicles become more technologically advanced, new features and functions made possible through the combination of vehicle sensors, so you can expand upon systems already installed. As is the case in the other industries, as I mentioned, the manufacturer may build in excess capacity to sensors, so the system capability may be expanded and improved upon through software-based updates. And by requiring material change that may improve the system be processed through the department and third-party certification entity. It increases the amount of time, particularly if there's a backlog within the kind of the market for third-party certification entities. It increases the amount of time required to provide an update to the consumer where there may be added benefit, both in terms of safety and fuel economy. The certification process, again, we'll look to try to provide specific feedback, has the potential to become slightly unwieldy, and there's no sort of recourse in the event of a dispute between a certification entity and a manufacturer. I think resolving disputes could create significant delays that would have a direct impact on a manufacturer's ability to compete within the marketplace. We also have significant concerns that with the requirement that manufacturers provide sensitive confidential business information outside of the organization with minimal justification as how it relates to the actual on-road testing, it may create an unnecessary business risk, and it's unclear how such data would be protected. It's also unclear whether providing such information to the third-party entity is necessary for evaluating the performance within the context of the draft behavioral competencies. So these are questions that we're wrestling with, but I think we'll hopefully be able to provide feedback and look forward to further discussions. Finally, the limitation that vehicles only be tested in California may severely limit the amount of testing that can be done in the vehicle. So it may be possible for folks to conduct testing in other regions. Mm-hmm. So while companies may choose to utilize the option of third-party certification entities for evaluating performance, we believe the DMV should adopt a self-certification model consistent with the federal approach. I think as has been discussed earlier today, with Secretary Fox's announcement, both the multi-stakeholder effort to develop both model policy as well as the processes for evaluating automated vehicle performance, we would encourage the DMV to be engaged in that process as well, because I think there's a lot of value that the broad stakeholder approach will have. So I think we'd recommend that you engage in that effort prior to making any further rulemaking steps, just to kind of gather the input, which I think hopefully you'll hear more of today. So,
if I can
thanks.
pick your brain for just a
Sure.
second, one of the things that we're concerned about is people using vehicles in a way that the manufacturer didn't intend. And so, like, for example, if the manufacturer intended that the vehicle was only supposed to be in an autonomous mode in a highway setting, what precautions would there be to prevent someone from using it outside of that intended use by the manufacturer? And so we'd be interested in hearing, maybe your thoughts on how we could go out and provide that protection, not only for the manufacturer, but for the rest of the public as well.
Yeah, I think that's an issue that we could have continued discussion about. I think just sort of relating to my own personal experience, the car that I have has a lot of advanced safety features, and if the sensors are unable to detect the roadway environment, it'll deactivate those and give me a warning that, hey, it's not providing you with the support in that circumstance. But I think with regards to the misuse, it's a question we really have to think about, particularly with research ongoing to understand how to keep the human in the loop or bring them back into the loop when necessary. Those are all sort of important questions, and I think as we learn more over time, there's a potential for the policies to evolve with that. But I think it's sort of making sure that we get it right first, primarily because of the potential for this to create a model that other states look at, and if it's harder to create that broad uniformity if it's already out of the bag, so to speak.
Yeah,
so.
And that's what's important about getting your comments and making sure that we get it right the first time.
So we hope to provide something in the relatively near future.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Anders Jensen, Volvo. I'd like to comment on your last question about how will we prevent drivers to engage autonomous driving in the wrong place. The way we look at it, and I think this is also addressing the climate issues and some of the other issues, the way we see it is that you will not be able to engage autonomy unless you're on a stretch of a highway and there's a link up to the cloud saying everything is okay, there are no climate conditions, there are no collisions or conflicts up ahead. Everything is all set to go autonomous. If you don't get the signal from the infrastructure, from the cloud, you're not going to be able to engage the system. So and that's also addressing the privacy issue. The hacking issue, cybersecurity issue. So if the systems detect something wrong in the algorithms or something wrong with the system, you won't get a signal. You will get a message back saying, no, you cannot engage the autonomous driving functions in this vehicle. And I like to also stress the difference between self-driving functions and autonomous. Self-driving functions are still, you engage something where you can keep a distance to the vehicle in front and stay in lane with the driver fully engaged monitoring. Autonomous, the way we see it, is where you take the driver away from the loop, and the car will do all the functions that the driver normally does in a much safer way. And I like to address that also. Safety is one of the main concerns we have by launching autonomous vehicles or working on autonomous vehicles. Because these vehicles, and I think this goes back to some of the comments about some earlier people this morning, that humans are much better in monitoring. This is safer to have people monitoring the driving than have the vehicle in charge. No, we think the other way around. We know that people who are getting a real low workload, being taken away from a task, just sitting watching, will the minds will go astray, they will think about other things, and they will be less concentrated on the driving. So we think it's better to hand this totally to the vehicle and have the vehicle to deal with everything that comes up on the road. And that's the way we see really getting down to low numbers and fatalities and injuries and crashes. What we know, the way we approach these vehicles, that they need to be very cautious, very polite, and always stay within speed limits. And they will have knowledge and intelligence, but the best drivers we can find built into the systems. So when they approach the situation, they will have 3D maps downloaded. So in addition to the sensors in the vehicle, looking around the vehicle and assessing everything, they have a 3D map that makes it possible to assess the situation way up ahead. So before entering a conflict situation, the vehicle will say, I realize there's something up ahead that I need to take care of. I will slow down now, make sure that I will not end up in a conflict situation. So we think this is going to be much safer than having humans monitoring the driving. I'd also like to address the reporting requirements. Sure. I think it's stated that we have to report any disengagement beyond 0.2 G braking or lateral function. 0.2 G is very low, mild braking. That's basically the adaptive cruise control braking. So this will lead to an enormous amount of data to be reporting to the third-party certification institute or whoever is going to do this. And I think it's unrealistic to provide that amount of data. I mean, no one's going to be able to analyze that enormous amount of data. So I'll suggest that reporting requirement to be modified. We're happy to provide you with comments about that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry to come back so quickly. On the seeing how the subject continues with testing. Been a tester most of my professional life, starting with a flight test engineer for high-performance fighter aircraft, eventually then autonomy and cyber. It's been an interesting evolution. It's been an interesting career. Nobody really likes to get tested. When I was a kid, I wasn't the guy in the back of the room saying, please give me another test. It's not something that a lot of people will come forward with. There's a way of developing a construct for a test, though, that can cause it to be an enforcement function, and there's a way that you can construct a test towards an enabling function. For most of the folks in the industry, what we have found is that their internal testing is really more the enabling. It is actually part of their design loop. It's part of a feedback loop in which they are learning, and then they apply those lessons as they get into the next iteration of a design. They look at independent testing, external testing, as more of an enforcement function. So what we're working on is trying to figure out how can we, with our developers, how can we perform that independent external testing that is more of an enabling function than an enforcement function and become part of that feedback loop. And I would suggest that you could do the same when you construct your regulations and policy. I talked earlier about the constituencies of test. We talked about the operator really quickly. There are others, though. For us in the Department of Defense, a lot of discussion about man-machine teaming. So there's actually the machine's peers, which is the human. Okay? And so that human trusting the machine, who is partnering with him or her to perform a particular task or mission, there has to be some trust there. There's the commander, who is then deploying the system making those decisions. And, of course, we have lawyers engaged in the liability issues associated with that. There's National Command Authority. There are people that are responsible for enforcement of policy and treaties. There are the people who are rightfully looking very closely at the Department of Defense for ethics and morality issues. And then, of course, there's the public. So we have a broad constituency that needs to be the consumers of our test process and our test data. And again, sirs, I would suggest you have that same, a very similar constituency to think about when you make decisions regarding the need for independent testing. And regardless of whether or not you go with independent testing or self-certification, there, of course, must be a tremendous amount of transparency and a mechanism in place and clear regulations that foster that transparency while protecting intellectual property. And not coming up with regulations, this is what we're dealing with as well, that stifle innovation. So those are some of the things that we have in common there. And then one last comment on, you talked about, can the machine understand whether or not the human is operating out of bounds? We not only are we working on figuring out how do we test to engender trust, we are concerned now with overtrust. We already have, and I would also make the argument to many in the audience here from the manufacturing world, we deal with autonomy at rest and autonomy in motion. I believe that many of the cars that are out there today, modern cars, have plenty of autonomy already in them. I think the industry is getting comfortable with that. They're actually mobile platforms, these vehicles, but they have what we would call autonomy at rest embedded within those platforms. Now you're just asking autonomy to take over the mobile functions as well, which were once the resident of the job of the human. When we take a look at this issue of overtrust, then we are trying to ensure that the system has mechanisms in place to override the human. And that is something that we are testing for. So, and we have a number of different specific examples and instances that we can share with you.
Thank you. We were touching on the areas of cybersecurity and privacy and reporting. I'd like to move to that area and start talking about privacy with respect to the data that the vehicles are collecting and the cybersecurity requirements. I know that there have been people that have spoke this morning that said that they would like to touch on that, so I'd like to open it up for those comments now.
John Simpson again with Consumer Watchdog. Your section 227.76, information privacy, I think is a good step in the right direction. I mean, it's important that the operators disclose information not necessary for the operation of the vehicle, and you require that. Then the manufacturer has to get the consent of the operator before it's gathered. Good steps. The problem I see, though, is that the manufacturer could require the operator to provide that data as a contingency for operating the car. So in other words, it would be you could only, if you were going to use the car, you could only agree to give them the data. And I think you need a provision that says that you can operate the vehicle without providing information that is not relevant to the safety and navigation of the car. The other thing I think there needs to be, and I will probably work on some specific language that does that, the other issue is if that data is gathered, I think there needs to be some sort of provision that it cannot be shared with a third party for commercial purposes, at least without the permission of the operator of the vehicle. And so, as I say, I think it's a step in the right direction in privacy here, but I think you need to go a little bit further to truly give the person who is operating the car control over their own data.
John, what do you think of, and I may have it wrong, so I hope the gentleman correct me. I think earlier one of the concerns was what we had when we talked about the data reporting was that they considered the data to be, owned by the owner of the vehicle. And so would that, if you took that attitude that the data is owned by the owner of the vehicle, would it?
I'm not sure that every vehicle owner believes that. I mean, a manufacturer. I'm sorry. I mean, there's a lot. and we're talking about crash data there, I think, what that was relevant to. This is more, it seems to me, the sort of information, it's not the information that gets you from point A to point B, but it's all the stuff that's gathered about what you did along the way, which really isn't necessary to the safe operation of the car to know that you stopped here, you stopped here, you stopped there. It could be very relevant to someone who, say, wanted to have some sort of a system where they would target ads over the car or something like that. That's the distinction I'm making about. I mean, these things really can suck up a lot of information. In fact, the navigation systems and stuff that's on conventional vehicles now do the same sort of thing. So, and that's also a big privacy problem.
Did you have any comments about the cybersecurity provisions of the draft proposal?
Only that potentially that's a huge issue, and I'm still thinking through all the safety. I mean, just an article today about how driverless vehicles are going to offer more opportunities for hacking, and I worry about that. I don't have solutions yet.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to be heard on either of those subjects? Thank you, Ms. Baumann.
Hi, Monica Baumann again with the California New Car Dealers. I echo some of my concerns I mentioned earlier with the certification process, particularly when it comes to operators and the point at which the disclosure would be provided. As currently drafted, the disclosure must be provided by the manufacturer. Although direct sales is permitted in California, the vast majority of new vehicles are sold by franchise dealers. So it's unclear when this disclosure would be provided and how it would be provided. In addition, it's a requirement on that the disclosure is provided to an operator and the acknowledgement is received by from the operator. There may be multiple operators of a vehicle, and it's also unclear from the certification process whether an individual could then operate any vehicle of a certain make or any vehicle within a model family. Those things remain unclear at this point in time. So we have some concerns about the requirement as drafted.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Thank you, Ms. Shahan.
Rosemary Shahan with Consumers for Auto Reliability and Safety. And I'd just like to say on cybersecurity that I think the agency is absolutely correct. That is a really serious issue. It's already an issue with vehicles. There are a number of vehicles that are subject to recall because of cybersecurity problems that have surfaced with them. And when people have less control of the car and it is more dependent on the operation of the car to operate safely, then the stakes go up remarkably. And I know Senator Markey has been urging NHTSA to do a lot more on cybersecurity. As far as I know, the agency shares a lot of the concerns, but hasn't come up with regs. So once again, the DMV is kind of forging new territory. But I do think it is something that's absolutely important to address. We don't need to have hackers controlling cars that are operating on our roads. And as far as privacy goes, I've reached out to other groups, and I know that there are some other groups that want to submit comments that have way more knowledge about privacy issues than I do. So I'll
please encourage them to
defer
do so.
them.
Yeah, and they can just submit it to the email address that's noted on the bottom of the agenda, and we'll get those.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jensen?
Okay, and this is Jensen Wolmer, third time. Cybersecurity is a real serious issue, of course it is, and we take that very seriously. First of all, I think regulating cybersecurity is going to be extremely difficult because this is moving so fast, and it's a global issue. And it's not just with autonomous vehicles. It's as soon as you have connected vehicles. We have to remember that. This is not being created by autonomous vehicles. It's created by connected vehicles. And all vehicles are going to be connected in the future, so it's a serious matter. Regulating, we know regulations takes a long time. They take a long time. And there's no way catching up with regulations. So I think we like the approach of the governments and authorities working together with manufacturers And we would prefer this on a federal basis because get the uniform rules or guidelines federally instead of having something in California and something else in the rest of the U.S. But definitely it's a serious matter, and we very much like to cooperate with the governments on this. And like I said, regulations, probably not, because it's going to take too long, and these hackers are going to be far ahead of the development of regulations. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Was there anyone else?
Hi there, Paul Scullion again from Global Automakers. So I guess there were just a few things that we identified so far. We're obviously still going through, some of which seem to be attributable to circumstances where the DMV has proposed regulatory requirements for the operation that seem to also apply for testing. Specifically, Section 22744 requires that the manufacturer provide the DMV with potentially sensitive information in the event of a crash involving an automated vehicle. And to a certain extent, this sort of presupposes that the manufacturer will be made aware of the crash by the consumer, plus any data captured by the event data recorder may be the property of the vehicle owner, and consent must be provided to access that data or to share it with third parties such as the DMV or other law enforcement agencies. So I think to really sort of think about particularly how you're defining things like event data recorder. And we have a sort of high-level concern related to that it expands upon the definition put together by NHTSA. Adds a little bit of uncertainty and confusion surrounding how existing EDR laws in the state may apply in this circumstance. So we'd sort of request that at this time the DMV reconsider its approach and use alternate terminology when addressing specific legislative requirements regarding data that's sort of above and beyond the requirements of FMVSS. Sort of to follow up on some of the other comments made by some of the other folks today, with regards to personally identifiable information, both automotive trade associations got together last year, and I'm not sure if you have seen a copy, but we have developed sort of comprehensive privacy principles to address how information is used, both in terms of the context, consent, how it's shared, with any parties based on that consent. So we'd encourage you to sort of look at those as well. And in addition, just sort of general comments on cybersecurity. We've been sort of very proactive over the last number of years in the auto industry and continue to take proactive steps to try to improve the security of vehicles and sort of build that cyber resiliency. So we established Automotive Information Sharing and Analysis Center, basically to share information about potential threats and vulnerabilities that may exist within the marketplace. In addition, we also announced a few weeks ago that we're kicking off an effort to develop automotive-specific cybersecurity best practices to address emerging issues related to cybersecurity to ensure that vehicles remain protected. So,
would you be willing to share some of that information with us?
I can certainly provide that in email. We do have some information on our website, globalautomakers.org, but I can certainly forward that to you as well. It sort of outlines the steps that we're going to be taking over the next few months, both in conjunction with the automotive trade associations as well as the Auto ISAC, and we'll be likely engaging with external stakeholders as well at various stages throughout the process to sort of understand what steps may need to be taken. So we can definitely keep you apprised of what's going on in that area as well.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I'm looking at it. I don't see any others coming forward. I want to open it up. If there's anything that's in the regulations that we haven't necessarily brought up as a topic for discussion today that you would like to make a comment on or provide some suggestion on, I'd like to open it up at this time for you to come on forward and do that. Go ahead.
Yes, and it's Jensen Volvo. There's a clause and said that if an operator has handed over control to the vehicle and there's something happening, the police comes up and the citations could go to the operator, to the driver, even if the car was in control. We think we don't support that at all. We think if the driver has handed over control to the vehicle, and there's something wrong, the vehicle's algorithm or the vehicle makes a mistake, this should not fall upon the driver. I think that because that we want to create a trust for our consumers that once it's okay to activate the autonomous driving mode. We have done everything safe, and anything that happens is our liability. So the citation for the driver, who's totally not to blame for this, we think will make consumers say, okay, if I'm going to fall into this trap of being given a citation for something that I'm not to blame for, this will stop consumers from buying this kind of equipment. So we like to think that consumers trust it and say, okay, if everything's fine, I hand it over to the vehicle, then I'm not going to be blamed for anything that happens while the vehicle's in control. So we don't support that part in the draft regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? We're going to open it up for anything else that you see in the regulations that you'd like to make a comment on.
This is John Simpson again. This just goes to the point of transparency. And I just wanted to say that the DMV, in its whole approach here, after some initial stumbles perhaps, did, I think, go down the path of transparency in terms of things like requiring or posting the crash reports. The whole approach with the disengagement reports being available online is commendable and is really helping everyone understand the situation, although we sometimes have different analyses of that information. It is there and available, and that is fantastic. So I hope that the regulations continue that sort of spirit as much as possible, and that as much of the information that you gather will be viewed as stuff that automatically be made public to the web with redactions of names or whatever when necessary to protect privacy, but that this is a tremendously exciting new technology, and to have so much transparency about what's actually being done is appropriate, and that seems to be the mode you're operating in now. In places where you could tweak this regulation to enforce that and underscore that is your approach would be very helpful.
Thank you. Anyone else with any general comments that they'd like to make at this time? Go right ahead.
Hi, Paul Damon from BMW again. Sort of a general topic, really not jealous of what you were tasked with the topic of coming up with the regulation, behavioral competencies, and how to test it. I'm concerned that the current construction that you have with the third-party certification combined with the behavioral competencies that are currently quite vague, that leads to a lot of subjectivity. I know that's very difficult because you guys have a time limit, but the reason why I understand why they're vague is because we don't have the data. But unfortunately, right now, nobody really has the data. NHTSA is currently working on that. They have a whole research arm at their disposal, which I don't believe you do. And also, they're working together with the manufacturers to come up with those answers. If we had all the answers, we most likely would already have things on the road. But we're still in the testing phase. And so that's why it's extremely difficult right now to come up with those very specific. In Europe, they have more of the third-party testing as compared to here in the U.S., and that's because they have those specific requirements when it comes to, for instance, for passive safety and things like that. When it's general, it becomes a very subjective test, and manufacturers are quite concerned about that because we can develop to requirements. When we have a specific requirement, we can definitely develop to those. The difficulty is when those requirements aren't specific, it could come that we develop everything, we have our belief on what's safe, and somebody else doesn't agree with that. So I just wanted to say that comment. I know it's not extremely constructive in this, but it's something that we have noticed.
It's good to hear. Thank you. Is there anyone else? Well, I just want to give you an idea of what happens next. We have a second. I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Promise this is the last one. Just a few sort of miscellaneous items to just bring to your attention. So in the the permitting process. The DMV is proposing that manufacturers submit a fee of $33,000 to $50,000 plus additional costs for consultants and contractors retained by the department for reviewing the application. Now we recognize sort of the resource constraints that may be on the department in terms of being able to review some of the applications, but I think it's just something to note that there are concerns of possibly uncontrolled costs within the application structure and sort of how that would be managed. So I think, we're interested in sort of following up and discussing that a little bit further. Sort of an additional issue, and this may have been covered already, but the department proposes that the manufacturer's permit to deploy automated vehicles may be revoked if the vehicles are subject to an open recall or based on the department's determination that the vehicles are not safe for public operation. And I guess there were just sort of a few nuance issues that we wanted to make sure that were in your mind as you move forward. So basically, the NHTSA has developed a robust process for addressing issues related to defects and non-compliance issues. And if a motor vehicle or item of motor vehicle equipment is identified as presenting an unreasonable risk to safety, the manufacturer will have to take appropriate steps to remedy that concern. And revoking or suspending a manufacturer's permit for deploying automated vehicles, if there is an open recall, may not be appropriate in all circumstances. So, for example, a recall may only apply to one particular model or a subset of vehicles within that model line. So a broad revocation of suspension of a manufacturer's permit to deploy may not be appropriate, and a measured approach must be taken. An additional concern is, and we're not quite sure how or what the intent is at the moment. If the remedy to address a recall-related issue requires a material change to the automated vehicle technology, it's unclear to the extent which the process of having to submit a new application to the department and go through third-party certification process again would delay the ability to provide a fix in certain circumstances. So we're interested in sort of understanding more about that. Sure. That's kind of all I had, so I don't have anything on my list.
Excellent, thank you.
Great.
What I was going to say with respect to next steps, we appreciate everyone's participation today. Really do encourage you, if you have some comments that you haven't made, orally today, to go ahead and submit them to the email address that is listed on the agenda. They will be a really big help to us as we try to move forward and come up with the regulatory proposal. Of course, that next step is to actually come up with a version of the regulations that we would put out for what would be the formal rulemaking proceeding. This is not the introduction of the formal rulemaking proceeding. That would involve us, again, noticing a set of regulations and then inviting both the public the public comments in writing and orally on a 45-day notice period. We'd like to do that soon. And so that's what's important about getting your comments to us. It's not, I don't have a timeline where I say you must have those comments by 5 p.m. next Friday. No, we just encourage you, if you have things that you'd like us to take a look at, suggestions for language. Pointing out, a good thing about today's session is a lot of speakers got up and told us where there is ambiguity. And, one of the categories for getting a regulation approved is that it's not ambiguous, or if there's clarity problems. We really want to know that, because the goal is, at the end of the day, to have a regulation that can be approved, and we can get in the business of actually having the cars deployed on the streets. We heard a lot of great comments about, what the promise of autonomous technology is. The mobility for the disabled. The mobility for senior citizens. And then there's always the big thing that the promise of the technology is, which is the safety function. We've heard about how many people are killed in traffic collisions on an annual basis. And, the department, our goal is to get something out there that we can take advantage of all of those things. Just think of how exciting it is for all those people that spoke this morning about, the restrictions that they see with their ability to participate in society, and how freeing it would be if they could have their own vehicle, or a vehicle that they could hail, however it works, that would allow them to get a job, to take their child to school, and to not have to worry about the hurdles that are faced right now with respect to, mobility in society. And we are excited about playing a role in rectifying that situation. So really, I guess what I want to stress is that your participation in this proceeding gets us there, and we'd like to get there soon. And so as the next part that you could look forward to, if you're not coming to Los Angeles and have thought for a couple of days about additional things you want to point out to us, is to submit those comments to us so we can actually get to work in drafting what would be that final proposal. The session today has been recorded. It will be available on our internet site. And so if you go back, I'm not sure how soon that will be, but if even after that you see things that you want to point out to us, again, I encourage you, take advantage of that regulations mailbox to let us know. We really want a product at the end that works, that gets us on the road. And, the funny thing I didn't point out about the statute, they said we were supposed to have these regulations in place by January 1 of last year. And here we are on January 28th, a year later, and we're not there yet. And so we want to be there. That really is a goal of ours. And we want to be ready as the technology develops to have, the flexibility that we're going along. We hear the comments about, there should be one system, and we really have been paying attention to what's going on with NHTSA. We keep in contact with them. As Bernard mentioned, he's on some of the national working groups. As a matter of fact, they're international working groups. They're trying to look at model ways to do this. But again, the goal is let's get it right. And let's get it out there so that we can encourage the development of the technology in our state, so that we can, all of us can live with the benefits that the technology promises. So again, I really appreciate all of you coming in today, appreciate all of your participation today, and really look forward to receiving anything that you want to submit to us in writing. Thank you.